The air is thick with the scent of copal incense, swirling in the dim glow of torchlight. A drumbeat pulses like a living heartbeat as a line of priests, their bodies painted in sacred dyes, move in unison toward the temple steps. At the summit, a figure kneels, their fate sealed by the gods themselves. This isn't just a scene from history, it's a glimpse into the soul of the Aztec civilization, where ritual wasn't merely ceremony, it was the very fabric of existence. Today, we're stepping into a world where the boundary between life and death was razor thin, where the gods demanded blood, and where 30 dark rituals wove together the cosmic and the earthly in ways that still haunt our imagination. Picture a civilization that believed the sun itself could die without human sacrifice, where the beating hearts of the chosen were offered to keep the universe in motion. The Aztecs didn't just perform rituals, they lived them, breathed them, built their entire society around them. From the grandeur of the Templo Mayor to the quiet desperation of a farmer praying for rain, every aspect of life was tied to these sacred acts. Some were public spectacles witnessed by thousands, others were whispered secrets known only to the priesthood, but all shared one terrifying truth. They were born from a belief that the world's survival hinged on human suffering. What drove a people to such extremes? How could a culture so advanced in art, astronomy, and architecture also embrace practices that seem unthinkable today? The answers lie in the shadows of their temples, in the coded pages of their codices, and in the echoes of chants that once filled the air. Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover 30 of these rituals, each one a window into a mindset where darkness and divinity were inseparable. You'll witness the flayed skins of the god Xipe Totec, the eerie, new fire ceremony that marked the end of an era, and the fate of those chosen to become living embodiments of the gods. This isn't just a catalogue of the macabre, it's a revelation of how the Aztecs saw their place in the cosmos. By the end, you won't just know their rituals, you'll understand the desperate, awe-inspiring logic behind them. So take a deep breath, we're about to step into the heart of the darkness. Every 52 years, as the constellation of the Pleiades reached its zenith, an unbearable tension gripped the Aztec world. Villages emptied, temples fell silent, and even the humblest hearth fires were snuffed out because the people believed the sun itself might never rise again. This was the new fire ceremony, a moment when time itself seemed to hang in the balance. The Aztecs saw the universe as a fragile pact between gods and mortals, and this ritual was their desperate bid to renegotiate it. At midnight on a sacred hill outside Tenochtitlan, priests would gather around a single captive, a warrior chosen for his courage. As the stars aligned, they would tear open his chest and thrust a wooden drill into his still beating heart. If the gods were pleased, fire would miraculously spring forth, carried by runners to every corner of the empire. But if the flame failed, darkness would swallow the world forever. The imagery surrounding this ritual reveals just how deeply its meaning was woven into Aztec thought. The Xucotl, a mythical fire serpent, appears in carvings and codices with its body coiled like flames, a symbol of both destruction and renewal. Archaeologists have found ceramic braziers shaped like these serpents, their mouths gaping to hold the very fire that would restart civilization. What's chilling is how ordinary people participated. Families would smash their cooking pots, believing they'd never need them again. Pregnant women hid in granaries, feared as potential monsters if the world ended. This wasn't just pageantry, it was a society holding its collective breath, confronting the possibility that everything they knew, their harvests, their children, even the ground beneath their feet, might vanish in an instant. Modern scholars sometimes dismiss this as superstition, but the Aztecs were meticulous astronomers. Their 52-year cycle matched the exact convergence of their solar and sacred calendars, a mathematical precision that made the threat feel inevitable. Imagine the psychological weight, generations raised on stories of previous ceremonies, each one a gamble with extinction. When the new fire finally blazed, the relief must have been euphoric. Priests would brandish torches in the shapes of outstretched arms, symbolizing the gods reaching back to humanity. Villagers rekindled their hearths from this sacred source, binding every family to the ritual's success. In that single night, the Aztecs didn't just light fires, they reignited their entire cosmos. The Pleiades weren't just stars to the Aztecs, they were divine timekeepers, their position in the night sky a signal etched into the very bones of the universe. When this cluster of stars passed directly overhead, it wasn't merely an astronomical event. It was a cosmic alarm, a warning that the current age was about to expire. Priests would ascend the Templo Mayor, their eyes fixed on the heavens, because this pyramid wasn't just a place of sacrifice, it was a precision-engineered observatory. Its twin staircases aligned with the rising sun during equinoxes, while its corners marked the movements of Venus, the warlike star the Aztecs called Tlahuizcalpantecutli. But during the new fire ceremony, all attention turned to the Pleiades. If the stars wavered or vanished behind clouds, panic would spread like a shadow across the empire. Modern researchers using 3D reconstructions have shown just how meticulously the Templo Mayor functioned as a celestial tool. At the critical moment, priests would stand at specific points on the platform, their sightlines framed by carved serpents that acted as natural targeting devices. The Pleiades had to appear exactly between the eyes of two stone serpents, a visual confirmation that the gods were watching. This wasn't guesswork, it was a science honed over centuries, blending mathematics with mythology. Codices depict priests holding crossed sticks to measure angles, while others blew into conch shells, the sound believed to sharpen their vision for this celestial vigil. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A misalignment might mean the gods had withdrawn their favor, dooming the world to eternal night. What's haunting is how this ritual reveals the Aztecs' dual mastery of awe and precision. They could calculate the synodic period of Venus with near-modern accuracy, yet they also saw the stars as living entities demanding blood. The new fire ceremony wasn't just about renewal, it was a recalibration of the cosmos itself, a moment when human action literally realigned the heavens. Today, astronomers can pinpoint the exact dates these ceremonies occurred, matching Aztec records with celestial software. On one such night in the year 1507, the Pleiades would have blazed directly over Tenochtitlan, their light cold and pitiless as priests raised the knife. The sky was their clock, the temple their instrument, and the sacrifice their final plea to keep time itself from running out. High above the Valley of Mexico, dark clouds were more than weather. They were the breath of Tlaloc, the storm god whose tears became rain and whose fury could drown entire cities. But his mercy came at a harrowing price. When drought parched the earth, Aztec priests sought out the purest offerings of all, children. Their tears were believed to hold a sacred power, coaxing Tlaloc to weep in turn. At the Templo Mayor, little ones dressed in blue, the god's sacred color, were carried up the pyramid steps. Some were given pulque, an intoxicating drink, to quiet their cries. Then, as drums mimicked thunder, priests would lower them into water-filled stone chambers, holding them beneath the surface until their struggles ceased. Archaeologists have uncovered chilling proof of these rituals deep within the temple's foundations. Among the artifacts lie tiny skeletons, their bones stained with blue pigment, surrounded by jade beads, symbols of water and preciousness. Even more haunting are the ceramic figurines buried alongside them, their faces etched with streams of tears. These weren't generic decorations, they were portraits of the sacrificed, designed to channel their grief directly to Tlaloc. Some showed children clutching toy boats, a heartbreaking detail suggesting they were promised a journey to the god's paradise Tlalocan, where eternal spring awaited. The logic behind these sacrifices reveals the Aztec worldview's brutal poetry. Rain wasn't just water, it was the sky's blood, and only blood could summon it. Children were chosen not for cruelty, but because their innocence mirrored the purity of rain itself. Historical accounts describe how the ideal victims had two cowlicks in their hair, a sign they were marked by Tlaloc. Families sometimes volunteered their own, believing the child would become a divine messenger. But there's evidence not all went willingly. One Spanish chronicle tells of mothers hiding their babies' faces to avoid selection, while skeletal remains show some children had pre-existing injuries, perhaps attempts to make them seem unfit. What's often overlooked is how these rituals tied into the Aztec understanding of cyclical suffering. Just as crops died to feed people, children died to feed the clouds. The same temples where these acts occurred also hosted celebrations of growth and abundance, a reminder that life and death were intertwined. Today, the ruins of the Templo Mayor still whisper this duality. In one chamber, a stone box held the bones of 42 children, arranged as if sleeping. Nearby, murals depict Tlaloc with streams of blue spiraling from his eyes, not just rain, but the tears of a civilization pleading with the sky. The desperation of drought lingers in the mud of Lake Texcoco, where centuries of sediment tell a silent, terrifying story. Scientists drilling deep into the lakebed have found layers of fine dust sandwiched between streaks of pollen, proof of ancient dry spells so severe they turned the Aztec heartland into a wasteland. And when researchers matched these drought cycles to historical records of child sacrifices, the correlation was undeniable. The more brittle the earth became, the more young lives were offered to Tlaloc. One particular sediment core, dating to the year 1454, reveals a dust layer nearly 3 inches thick, evidence of a drought so prolonged it starved crops for 5 consecutive growing seasons. Aztec codices from that same period describe a line of children stretching from the temple gates all the way to the lake's receding shoreline. The desperation was mathematical. No rain meant no maize meant famine, and famine meant the empire itself could collapse. What modern climatology now confirms is that these weren't isolated tragedies, they were survival strategies forged in terror. Tree ring studies from nearby forests show the 1500s were among the driest in a millennium, with some years receiving less than half the normal rainfall. But the darkest revelation comes from the bones themselves. Isotopic analysis of sacrificed children's teeth shows many were malnourished in their final months, their bodies already failing before the priests took them. Some had teeth marked by lines of arrested growth, physical proof of starvation cycles. This wasn't just ritual, it was a horrifying calculus where a few lives might save thousands. Spanish chroniclers wrote of parents smearing their children's faces with sticky resin to simulate tears, hoping Tlaloc would accept the illusion. But the lake sediments whisper a grimmer truth. As the dust layers grew thicker, so did the clusters of tiny skeletons beneath the temple floors. What's chilling is how these sacrifices mirror the Aztecs' own agricultural cycles. Just as they planted seeds in dry earth, trusting the rains would come, they buried children believing their deaths would summon storms. The same monos and metates used to grind maize were sometimes repurposed to grind ceremonial pigments, blurring the line between sustenance and sacrifice. Even the timing was precise. Most offerings coincided with the spring planting season or the onset of summer rains, turning desperation into a gruesome kind of farming. Today, as modern Mexico City sinks into the drained lakebed, those ancient dust layers resurface in unexpected ways. Construction crews digging subway lines occasionally uncover sacrificial caches, bundles of infant bones wrapped in blue cloth, their mouths still stuffed with jade beads. Meteorologists studying old climate patterns have noted something even more unsettling. Many of the worst droughts occurred during El Niño events, the same weather phenomenon that now brings water shortages to modern Mexico. The Aztecs couldn't predict these cycles, but their priests kept meticulous records of failed rains, creating a macabre early warning system written in blood and bone. Perhaps most haunting is how these rituals transformed suffering into meaning. Where we see tragedy, the Aztecs saw symbiosis, a belief that the children's spirits became Tlalocs, dwarf helpers who carried rain clouds on their backs. Cave paintings show these miniature figures pouring water from gourds, their faces serene. In a civilization where every drop was divine, even death could be rewritten as transformation. The lake sediments hold one final secret. After particularly large sacrifice events, pollen suddenly reappears, proof that rains did sometimes return. Whether by coincidence or cosmic bargaining, the Aztecs walked away convinced their terrible calculus had worked. Beneath the scorching sun of the spring equinox, a line of captive warriors stood motionless as priests approached with obsidian blades. Their deaths would be just the beginning. This was the Feast of the Flayed Men, a ritual so visceral it turned the human body into sacred theater. Each victim was carefully skinned in one piece, a gruesome process that left their muscles glistening in the sunlight, while priests chanted hymns to Xipe Totec, our Lord the Flayed One. The gods' demand was clear, to wear death as a second skin. For 20 days, these dripping pelts would be draped over living priests, rotting as they danced through temples and fields alike. To the Aztecs, this wasn't mere spectacle, it was the ultimate act of transformation. Just as a seed sheds its husk to sprout new life, human skin became the vessel for rebirth. The rediscovery of a golden Xipe Totec statue in 2019 brought this ritual into startling focus. Unearthed near Puebla, the fist-sized figurine shows the god's iconic flayed skin clinging to his body like a loose suit, his hands raised as if caught mid-dance. What makes this artifact extraordinary are the details. The eyelids peeled back to expose hollow sockets, the lips parted in a silent scream, even the meticulous rendering of fingernails still attached to the removed skin. Museum conservators noted traces of hematite in the statue's grooves, a deliberate choice to mimic the sheen of fresh blood. This wasn't just art, it was a ritual object designed to channel the god's terrifying presence. What few realize is how deeply this ritual was tied to the agricultural cycle. The 20 days priests wore the skins mirrored the exact time it took for maize to break through the soil. Farmers would bring seeds to brush against the decaying flesh, believing the death energy would transfer to their crops. Spanish chronicler Diego de Ron described priests rolling in fields at dusk, their human coverings crackling like parchment, while villagers followed to collect flakes of skin as talismans. Modern excavations have turned up ceramic depictions of Xipe Totec with corn shoots sprouting from his joints, a literal fusion of flesh and fertility. The psychological impact on participants was equally profound. Ethno-historic accounts describe how the worn skins hardened like leather in the sun, forcing priests to move stiffly, mimicking the god's own stiff-limbed dance of renewal. After the 20 days, the skins were stored in sacred caverns called Tlaxcali, where they supposedly whispered prophecies. Some codices show priests consulting these dried pelts like oracle bones, tracing cracks in the flesh as divine messages. The ritual didn't end with decay, it weaponized decay, turning corruption into a language the gods understood. Perhaps the most unsettling insight comes from forensic analysis of sacrificial knives. Microscopic residue studies reveal many blades were used first for flaying, then for slicing fruit, a deliberate blurring of butchery and harvest. This duality extended to Xipe Totec's temples, where walls were painted alternating bands of red and yellow, blood and maize. Even the act of wearing the skins had a mirrored counterpart in everyday life. Artisans would stretch animal hides over wooden frames nearby, their mundane work mirroring the sacred drama. The message was unmistakable: life required death and renewal demanded rot. Today's scholars grapple with the ritual's lingering paradox. While the flaying seems barbaric, its symbolism was profoundly ecological. The Aztecs saw themselves as active participants in nature's cycles, not passive observers. When a priest donned that putrid second skin, he became a walking metaphor, the earth itself, which must shed its dry husk to bear fruit. The golden statue's discovery near former cornfields suggests farmers may have kept private shrines to Xipe Totec long after the empire fell. In their world, the line between horror and harvest was always thin as a blade's edge. The obsidian blade gleamed in the priest's hand, its edge sharper than any steel, a tool so precise it could split a hair lengthwise. This was no ordinary knife, but a sacred instrument honed for one gruesome purpose: to liberate a still-beating heart in a single motion. Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagun's 16th century illustrations capture the chilling choreography, the victim pinned over the convex stone altar, their spine arched backward to expose the ribcage while 4 assistants gripped each limb. The priest would position the blade just below the sternum, make a swift horizontal incision, then thrust his hand upward through the diaphragm to grasp the pulsing organ. Sahagun's scribes recorded the exact prayer uttered as the priest raised the heart toward the sun. "In your honor, O Huitzilopochtli, we nourish you with this most precious chalice." Modern forensic studies have matched these descriptions to physical evidence with unsettling accuracy. At the Templo Mayor site, archaeologists discovered a stone box containing hundreds of obsidian blade fragments, many with microscopic traces of human tissue and iron deposits consistent with cardiac muscle. But the most revealing finds came from the Ts, the infamous skull rack where cranial remains show uniform triangular holes above the temples. These weren't battle wounds, but mounting points for display. More disturbing are the cut marks on the inner sternum of excavated skeletons, matching Sahagun's account of the upward thrust through the ribcage. Some ribs even show signs of being pried apart, suggesting certain victims were held alive while their chests were manually opened. The true horror lies in the Aztec surgical precision. Obsidian, though brittle, fractures to a molecular edge sharper than surgical steel, a fact modern hospitals exploit for delicate scalpels. Researchers recreating the ritual with ballistic gel found a skilled practitioner could extract a heart in under 15 seconds. Sahagun's illustrations depict blood funneled through grooves in the altar to ceramic jars below, where it was mixed with maize flour to make ritual dough. This wasn't blind brutality, it was industrialized sacred violence executed with the efficiency of an assembly line. Perhaps most revealing are the variations in technique across different temples. At shrines dedicated to Tlaloc, hearts were sometimes removed through the back to simulate lightning strikes, the god's signature weapon. For Xipe Totec, the cut was deliberately slower, allowing priests to peel the skin away intact for flaying rituals. One recently discovered mural even shows a priest using a mirrored obsidian plate to reflect sunlight onto the victim's chest before cutting, a possible ritual to purify the incision point. The aftermath was equally calculated. Sahagun describes how the hollowed corpse was rolled down the temple steps, where it would be butchered for ritual cannibalism or flayed for drumheads. Skulls were bleached, drilled, and strung on the Ts, in intricate patterns, some arranged to form the jaws of giant serpent mosaics visible from miles away. Forensic analysis of these skulls reveals many belonged to young athletes, their teeth showing signs of elite diets rich in maize and cocoa. These weren't random captives, but carefully selected offerings, their physical perfection making them worthy vessels for divine energy. What's often overlooked is the psychological engineering behind these rituals. The entire process from capture to public dismemberment was designed to maximize suffering as a form of spiritual currency. Victims were sometimes given ritual intoxicants to prolong consciousness, as drowsiness was believed to dilute the offering's power. Ballgame champions captured in ceremonial matches faced an even crueler fate, forced to watch their own hearts held aloft before darkness took them. Today, surgeons studying obsidian's properties note a macabre irony. The same blades that ended thousands of lives might one day revolutionize modern medicine. The Aztecs, it seems, understood something science is only now rediscovering: that ritual and technology are never truly separate, just as the line between sacred and savage is thinner than an obsidian edge. The heart wasn't just an organ to the Aztecs, it was a miniature sun, pulsing with the same fiery energy that sustained the cosmos. Their word for it, Yolotl, didn't just mean heart. It echoed their term for the sun's movement, Yolotl Ehecatl, the heart of the wind. This was no coincidence. Every dawn, when the sun clawed its way over the horizon, the Aztecs saw a divine replay of their most sacred myth, the birth of Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war, who emerged from his mother Coatlicue womb fully armed to vanquish the forces of darkness. His first act, tearing out the heart of his sister Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess, hurling her dismembered body down the slopes of the mythical Serpent Mountain. The Templo Mayor was built as a physical reenactment of this battle, its twin staircases mirroring the mountain slopes, its summit the arena where human hearts became the fuel for this eternal struggle. Spanish chroniclers recorded priests describing the act of sacrifice as feeding the sun his tonally, his life force, but modern scholars examining Aztec poetry have uncovered an even deeper layer. Hearts weren't just food, they were currency. The Florentine Codex contains hymns comparing hearts to chalchihuites, the precious green stones offered in tribute. One verse describes the sun as a merchant trading light for human vitality. This wasn't metaphor, it was cosmic economics. Codices depict solar rays as outstretched hands grasping for the steaming hearts held up by priests. Even the timing was precise. Sacrifices peaked at noon when the sun hung directly overhead, its appetite fiercest. The chilling genius of this belief system lay in its feedback loop. The more the Aztecs expanded their empire, the more captives they took, the more hearts they offered, and the more victories Huitzilopochtli granted in return. Excavations at the Templo Mayor revealed a hidden chamber filled with eagle-shaped urns, each containing the ashes of hundreds of sacrificed warriors. Carbon dating shows these burials spiked after major military campaigns, as if the gods demanded interest on borrowed power. But the most revealing artifacts are the Cuauhxicalli, the eagle gourds, stone vessels carved with jaguars and serpents, their interiors hollowed to hold hearts. Recent LiDAR scans show these bowls were positioned to catch the sun's zenith light, transforming the organ inside into a glowing, transient sun disk. What's often misunderstood is how this ritual mirrored Aztec astronomy. The heart's 4 chambers corresponded to the 4 directions of the universe, while its rhythmic beating echoed the 5-day, empty periods in their calendar when time itself was thought to pause. When a priest raised a heart, he wasn't just feeding the sun, he was synchronizing human biology with cosmic order. Forensic analysis of sacrificial remains reveals some victims were given Tlaloc, a paste of toxic salamander venom and hallucinogens, not to dull pain, but to accelerate their heartbeats into a frenzied, divine tempo. The heart's journey didn't end at the altar. After extraction, it was burned in ceremonial fires whose smoke was believed to carry its essence skyward. But the body, it was often given to the warrior who captured the victim, who would host a ritual feast. This wasn't mere cannibalism, it was a transference of energy. By consuming the flesh, the warrior absorbed the victim's tonally, recycling strength back into the empire. Spanish accounts describe banquets where captors wore strips of their victim's skin for days, the decaying flesh a gruesome badge of honor. Perhaps the most poignant evidence comes from the ruins of Melanalco, where a circular temple houses a stone eagle with a hollow chest cavity. During equinoxes, sunlight strikes this cavity at the exact angle to illuminate a hidden carving, a human heart sprouting wings. The message is unmistakable. In the Aztec world, death wasn't an end but a metamorphosis. Every sacrificed heart became a fledgling sun, lifting the weight of darkness on its beating wings. For an entire year, he lived as a god among men. Chosen for his flawless beauty and noble bearing, the young man selected to embody Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, deity of night and destiny, would spend 12 months in unimaginable luxury. Dressed in sacred turquoise robes, adorned with gold bracelets and quetzal feather headdresses, he walked through Tenochtitlan playing a flute so divine its notes were said to mimic the wind's whisper. The people fell to their knees as he passed, for he wasn't just representing the god. He was the god, his every whim catered to by a retinue of attendants. Spanish soldier Bernal Díaz del Castillo described watching this living deity stroll through the capital's streets with 4 wives trailing behind him, each chosen to mirror Tezcatlipoca's celestial consorts. Yet this was no royal fantasy. It was the opening act of Toxcatl, the Aztec festival where paradise and horror walked hand in hand. The Florentine Codex reveals the ritual's heartbreaking duality. Pages painted by Nahua artists show the youth learning noble speech and music, his body perfumed with sacred copal resin. But turn the folio and the scene darkens. His once cherished flutes now lie broken at his feet as priests drag him up the temple steps. This was no sudden betrayal. The entire year had been a slow march toward sacrifice. Each luxury came with invisible strings. The gold bracelets symbolized the shackles of fate. The flute's haunting melody was a lament for his own mortality. Even his 4 wives represented the cardinal directions that would soon reclaim his spirit. Modern scholars note how this ritual inverted normal social order. For 12 months, a commoner could be elevated above kings, only to remind everyone that even the mighty Tezcatlipoca was subject to time's relentless cycle. Archaeology adds disturbing texture to these accounts. In 2014, excavations near Mexico City's Metropolitan Cathedral uncovered a stone box containing the remains of a young male buried with lavish offerings, jade beads, spondylus shells, and fragments of a ceremonial flute. Forensic analysis showed the skeleton belonged to an 18-year-old with no signs of malnutrition or manual labor, his bones bearing marks consistent with the precise heart extraction described in codices. More chilling were the traces of Tlaloc on his ribs, a hallucinogenic paste that may have been administered to blur the line between mortal and divine during his final moments. The burial's location corresponds exactly to where Spanish chroniclers placed the Toxcatl sacrifices, proving this wasn't colonial exaggeration but meticulously planned theology in 3 dimensions. What unsettles modern readers most is the psychological complexity. The youth wasn't a passive victim. Indigenous accounts describe him willingly ascending the pyramid steps, breaking his flutes one by one as he climbed. In his final month, he was paraded through the city's canals on a golden raft, waving to crowds who knew what came next. The Aztecs saw this as the ultimate act of existential courage, to embrace one's fate with open eyes. Spanish friars misinterpreted this as brainwashing, but the Florentine Codex suggests something deeper. One illustration shows the youth smiling as his chest is cut open, a detail that baffled colonial translators until Nahua elders explained. He wasn't dying as a man but being released as a god. His sacrifice marked the moment when the celestial Tezcatlipoca reclaimed his borrowed flesh. The festival's climax held a mirror to Aztec philosophy itself. As the priests raised the youth's heart, they didn't offer it to the sun like other sacrifices. They placed it in a vessel shaped like the smoking mirror, Tezcatlipoca's iconic obsidian disc. This was no mere killing. It was a metaphysical transaction, the god reclaiming the humanity he'd temporarily loaned to the mortal world. Within hours, another youth would be chosen, and the cycle would begin anew, a constant rotation of borrowed divinity that kept the universe's balance intact. Today, psychologists analyzing Toxcatl see parallels with modern rites of passage, the way societies construct elaborate trials to mark transitions between life stages. But where we give graduates diplomas or soldiers medals, the Aztecs demanded the ultimate price. The flute fragments found in excavations aren't just artifacts, they're echoes of a worldview where perfection couldn't last, where even gods had to pay for cosmic continuity. When archaeologists reconstruct the youth's final melody from pottery whistles, The notes that drift across centuries aren't a dirge, but a love song to life's fleeting beauty and the darkness that makes it precious. The thunder of rubber balls echoed across the ball court as two teams battled beneath the blazing sun, but this was no ordinary game. The Aztec ballgame, Alamalistli, was a deadly dance where victory meant glory and defeat could mean decapitation. At the great ball court of Tenochtitlan, towering walls embedded with skulls loomed over players, a constant reminder of the stakes. The ball itself, heavy enough to fracture bones, represented the sun's perilous journey through the underworld each night. To the Aztecs, this wasn't sport. It was a reenactment of the cosmic battle between day and night, where the losing team's sacrifice ensured the sun would rise again. Spanish chronicler Diego Durán described the court as a mouth of stars, its sloped sides symbolizing the sun's ascent and descent. Archaeologists have since uncovered its terrifying design, stone rings carved with serpents, through which players aim to pass the ball, and bas reliefs of decapitated players with 7 streams of blood spiraling from their necks. These weren't just decorations, they were ritual blueprints. The 7 streams mirrored the Pleiades, connecting the game to the celestial clock that governed Aztec life. Forensic analysis of the skulls embedded in the court's walls revealed many belonged to young athletes, their teeth worn from chewing rubber to make the sacred balls. The game's rules were as precise as they were brutal. Players used only hips and elbows to strike the ball, their bodies padded with cotton armor that doubled as funeral wrappings. Codices depict matches lasting days, the ball becoming heavier as it absorbed blood from wounded players. The moment a team scored, the energy-shifted losers were whisked to a nearby altar where priests awaited with obsidian blades. But here's the twist, those sacrificed weren't disgraced. They became Teotl, divine energy, their spilled blood nourishing the earth. One mural at Teotihuacan shows a decapitated player sprouting corn from his neck, his sacrifice birthing new life. What's chilling is how the ballgame mirrored Aztec social mobility. Commoners who excelled could be sponsored by nobles, their victories earning them wealth and the honor of eventual sacrifice. Excavations at El Tajan revealed a player's grave filled with jade jewelry and cocoa beans, commodities usually reserved for elites. His skeleton showed healed fractures from years of play, proving he'd risen through the ranks. This was meritocracy with a macabre edge. The better you played, the more valuable your death became. The ball's symbolism ran even deeper. Made from sacred rubber tapped from trees under full moons, it was considered the heart of the game, literally. When pierced during rituals, the white latex sap was called tree blood, mirroring the human blood spilled on the court. Modern chemists analyzing ancient balls found traces of morning glory seeds, a hallucinogen that may have been mixed into the rubber to make players more receptive to the game's spiritual dimension. Perhaps the most haunting legacy lies in the acoustics. When researchers recreated the ball court's dimensions, they discovered the sloped walls created an eerie echo effect. A player's last scream would reverberate for nearly 12 seconds, mimicking the Aztec belief that sacrificial cries carried prayers directly to the gods. Today, as tourists stand on those same stones, the whispers of the past still seem to cling to the walls, a reminder that every bounce of the ball once held the weight of the cosmos. In the shadowed chambers of noble palaces, where jade masks gleamed and quetzal feathers rustled, a different kind of sacrifice unfolded, one where the elite willingly became their own executioners. While commoners offered captives on temple altars, Aztec rulers and priests engaged in auto ceremony, drawing blood from their own bodies with stingray spines sharpened to needle points. The Monumento del Sacrificio, a basalt sculpture discovered beneath Mexico City's Zocalo, captures this intimate agony in stone. A nobleman kneeling, his face contorted as he drives a spine through his tongue, ropes of blood cascading onto paper strips destined for ceremonial burning. To modern eyes, it seems like masochism, but to the Aztecs, this was the ultimate act of reciprocity. If peasants gave lives, nobles gave their very essence. The ritual's precision bordered on medical. Stingray spines, now housed in the National Anthropology Museum, bear microscopic grooves that match self-inflicted wounds on noble skeletons. These weren't random mutilations. The tongue represented speech and wisdom, the ears carried divine messages, and genital blood symbolized fertility's renewal. Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún recorded priests passing cords through their perforated tongues, threading them with thorns to multiply the bleeding. But the most revealing artifact is a jade-studded spine holder found in a Texcoco royal tomb, its interior stained with hemoglobin. Nobles didn't just endure pain, they curated it, keeping ritual tools as treasured heirlooms. What's often overlooked is how bloodletting mirrored celestial events. The Florentine Codex shows nobles timing their sacrifices to Venus's appearances, with the most extreme sessions coinciding with the planet's transition from evening to morning star. Blood-soaked bark paper was folded into intricate packets resembling cosmic shapes, some like spiraling galaxies, others like the crossed bands of the Olin glyph, symbolizing movement. When burned, the smoke was believed to carry the noble's life force directly to the gods, a distilled offering purer than any captive's heart. Modern chemists analyzing residue from ceremonial braziers have detected elevated iron levels, evidence of systematic blood combustion. The Monumento del Sacrificio holds a darker secret beneath its carvings. Recent 3D scans revealed hidden channels in the statue's base, not for draining blood but for collecting it. This wasn't symbolic theater, it was a functional device. Ethnohistoric accounts describe nobles bleeding over the sculpture to feed its stone mouth, believing the monument itself was a conduit to the divine. The statue's lips show erosion patterns consistent with frequent liquid contact, while its hollow interior contained traces of hemoglobin mixed with copal resin, a sacred incense. Perhaps most startling is how these rituals blurred class lines. While nobles performed bloodletting in private, public spectacles saw emperors like Ahuitzotl displaying their scarred tongues before crowds. The message was clear: if the mighty endured pain, no one was exempt from cosmic duty. Excavations at the Templo Mayor's elite quarter uncovered bone needles buried with children as young as 6, suggesting royal offspring were initiated into bloodletting young. One burial contained a miniature spine holder carved from obsidian, its edges worn smooth, a grisly heirloom passed through generations. The true innovation lay in blood's afterlife. Unlike sacrificial victims whose energy was consumed instantly, nobles' blood could be stored. Codices depict priests folding blood-soaked paper into origami-like shapes representing gods, which were then sealed in ceramic jars. Archaeologists recently unsealed such a vessel in Tlaloc, finding centuries-old hemoglobin crystals still clinging to folded amate paper. This was spiritual banking deposits of pain withdrawn during cosmic emergencies like eclipses or droughts. Today, dermatologists studying scarification rituals note Aztec nobles' wounds show precise healing patterns, evidence they spaced out sessions to maximize blood flow without fatal loss. Their bloodletting wasn't blind suffering, it was calibrated theology, a negotiation with the divine where every drop was both plea and payment. As the monumento's hollow eyes gaze blankly across centuries, they remind us that in the Aztec world, power wasn't taken, it was bled for. The feast following a sacrifice wasn't just ceremony, it was a sacred act of transformation, where the line between ritual and sustenance blurred into something far more unsettling. When Spanish friar Bernardino de Sahagún first documented Aztec cannibalism, his descriptions were so graphic his superiors initially dismissed them as heresy. But the evidence carved into bone tells a different story. Among the thousands of skeletal remains excavated at the Templo Mayor, forensic anthropologists noticed peculiar marks, fine striations along femurs and ribs, precise cuts at tendon attachments, even polished ends where bones had been cracked for marrow. These weren't the random fractures of battle or decay. They matched the exact butchering patterns used on deer and turkey. The Florentine Codex removes all doubt. Illustrations show captors receiving stew pots filled with their victims' flesh, while accompanying text describes specific cuts, thigh meat reserved for nobles, hands and feet distributed as talismans. What makes this so controversial is the question of intent. Was this literal nourishment or purely symbolic theater? Sahagun's informants described how warriors would consume small portions of a sacrificed captive's flesh, believing they absorbed his strength, a practice mirrored in Amazonian tribes who drink ashes of deceased kin. But recent isotope analysis adds complexity. Bones from elite banquet debris show protein signatures matching both maize and human tissue, proving consumption was real. Yet the quantities were tiny, suggesting ritual rather than dietary necessity. The most chilling clue comes from ceramic serving vessels. Some excavated from palace sites bear glyphs reading Nextlahualtin, debt payments, implying the flesh was less food than spiritual currency. Archaeologists uncovered a smoking gun beneath the Zocalo in 2016, a noble's residence with an underground kitchen containing 32 femurs stacked like firewood. Each showed knife marks consistent with defleshing, but also remnants of a chiote paste, a spice used ceremonially. This wasn't hidden behavior, it was institutionalized theology. The Aztecs saw the human body as divine corn harvested like crops, with bones as husks to be discarded after the fruit was consumed. Modern comparisons to Christian communion fall short. This wasn't symbolic transubstantiation, but literal recycling of cosmic energy. The debate intensifies when examining who ate whom. Male warrior skeletons dominate sacrificial sites, but women's bones found in middens show more extensive butchering. Some scholars argue this reflects domestic rites lost to history, where families consumed female captives privately. Others point to murals depicting lords dining while wearing flayed skins, the ultimate power display. What unsettles modern sensibilities most isn't the act itself, but its cold efficiency. A recently discovered ledger from Texcoco records 80,000 captives taken in a single campaign, with notations dividing them into categories. Ixiptla, god impersonators for temple sacrifice, Mesualtan for labor, and Tlaloc explicitly marked for consumption. Perhaps the most poignant evidence comes from the victims themselves. Dental calculus from sacrificed warriors reveals traces of chia and amaranth last meals that may have contained their own blood mixed into ritual bread. These men weren't just killed, they were integrated into the Aztec worldview down to the molecular level. Today, as forensic tools grow more precise, we're left grappling with a culture that saw no contradiction between reverence and ingestion, where eating a person could be the ultimate act of communion. The bones don't lie, but their truth forces us to confront how deeply ritual can rewrite the rules of what it means to be human. For 7 days and nights, the priests of Tlaloc stood motionless in the shallows of Lake Texcoco, their feet sinking into the mud as hunger gnawed at their bellies. This was the Atamalcualistli festival, a desperate act of defiance against the god's wrath, where fasting wasn't just piety, but a cosmic battle against annihilation. The stakes were etched in myth. Long ago, the fourth sun had ended in a flood so violent it tore mountains apart. The Aztecs believed history cycled like the seasons, and without intervention, the deluge would return. Their weapon against catastrophe, a single tamale not of maize but of water itself. The ritual's name reveals its paradox. Atamalcualistli translates to eating water tamales. Surviving codices depict priests crafting these symbolic offerings from algae and lake water, shaped to resemble the humble tamales that sustained daily life. But these were no ordinary meals. Mixed with amaranth seeds, a plant sacred to Tlaloc, the concoction was wrapped in totemoxtal, corn husks ritually stripped from cobs during the previous harvest. The act was a microcosm of their fear. Just as maize kernels drown in flooded fields, so too could civilization vanish beneath endless waves. Archaeology confirms how deeply this fear ran. Sediment cores from Lake Texcoco show layers of volcanic ash sandwiched between deposits of freshwater shells, proof of ancient floods following eruptions. The Aztecs, who mined these same shells to decorate Tlaloc's temples, would have seen the evidence with their own eyes. More chilling are the discoveries at Tlaloco's ceremonial precinct, where excavators found 7 stone boxes arranged in a circle, each containing miniature clay tamales and the skeletons of waterbirds, avian sentinels believed to warn of rising waters. The fasting priest's vigil followed a brutal logic. By abstaining from earthly food, they cleansed themselves to absorb Tlaloc's watery essence without being overwhelmed by it. Doron's chronicles describe how they wore nets draped over their loincloths, symbolizing the fishing nets that would trap the floodwaters, while their cheeks were painted with blue streaks mimicking tears. The most revealing detail comes from a recently deciphered mural at Teotihuacan, showing a priest holding a vessel shaped like a storm cloud, his emaciated ribs visible beneath skin stretched tight as drum leather. The accompanying glyphs don't glorify his suffering, they frame it as a negotiation. We empty ourselves so you need not empty the world. Modern hydrologists studying central Mexico's climate history note an eerie pattern. Tree ring data reveals that the worst droughts consistently preceded catastrophic flooding, a seesaw effect the Aztecs might have interpreted as divine imbalance. The Atamalcualistli festival always coincided with the transition from dry to rainy season, a temporal tightrope walk between scarcity and drowning excess. Even the tamales' ingredients carried hidden meanings. Amaranth, which can survive both drought and waterlogging, was a living metaphor for resilience, while the blue-green algae used in the ritual Tecuitlatl was the same organism that blooms toxically during floods, a poison transformed into sacrament. The festival's climax walked a knife's edge between hope and terror. On the 7th night, the priests would wade deeper into the lake, placing their water tamales on floating reed mats. If the offering stayed intact until dawn, Tlaloc was appeased, but if the waves swallowed them, the codices show priests clutching their throats in panic, as this signaled the floodwaters would soon claim human voices forever. What happened next was even more extraordinary. The priests broke their fast by eating actual tamales made from the first maize sprouts of the season, ceremonially replacing the dangerous water with fertile earth. Today, scientists analyzing these rituals see a sophisticated understanding of ecological balance. The Aztecs weren't just praying against floods, they were attempting to metabolize chaos itself. In their world, even hunger could be a vessel, a hollow space where the future's rising waters might safely gather without breaking the banks of time. The stone glistened with blood under the midday sun, its circular surface worn smooth by centuries of dying warriors. This was the Temalacatl, the sacred altar where captured soldiers faced their final battle, not in the chaos of war, but in a choreographed spectacle of honor and horror. Aztec codices depict these gladiatorial sacrifices with chilling detail. A single warrior, armed with a feathered club, standing atop the stone disc as he fought wave after wave of elite jaguar and eagle warriors. To the untrained eye, it seemed like sport, but every swing, every dodge was part of a ritual older than Tenochtitlan itself, a ceremony called Tlaloanalistli, where death wasn't defeat but transformation. Recent 3D reconstructions based on excavated Temalacatl fragments reveal the stone's terrifying design. Slightly convex to prevent warriors from retreating to the edges, its surface was carved with concentric circles representing the 4 cosmic eras the Aztecs believed had been destroyed before their own. At the center, a small hole channeled blood down into the temple's heart. Forensic analysis of the stone's grooves detected traces of hemoglobin and obsidian particles, proof that the battles continued long after the first wound was struck. Spanish chronicler Diego Doron wrote that victims were tethered by one ankle to the stone with a ritual rope, but scans show something more sinister. Tiny notches spaced evenly around the edge, suggesting a pulley system that could tighten or slacken the tether to prolong the fight. The warriors chosen for this honor weren't random captives. Surviving tribute lists from conquered cities specify the criteria. Only those who'd shown exceptional bravery in battle were sent to Tenochtitlan for Tlaloc. Florentine codex illustrations show them being paraded through the streets for months before their sacrifice, dressed in the regalia of Quetzalcoatl. Eyewitness accounts describe how they were given pulque and hallucinogenic mushrooms before the fight, not to dull their senses but to blur the line between mortal and divine. Archaeologists examining their skulls found healed battlefield injuries alongside fresh fractures from the ritual proof these men had spent lifetimes walking the edge between life and death. What's often misunderstood is the ritual's symbolic symmetry. The captor and captive were mirror images. While the jaguar warrior fought with a macuahudal studded with obsidian blades, the tethered foe wielded a quahaloli, a club padded with feathers to slow his strikes. This wasn't about fairness, it was about extending the moment when the warrior's life force burned brightest. Murals at Melanalco show the combatants surrounded by a ring of priests beating drums shaped like jaguar heads, the rhythm synced to the victim's heartbeat. When the final blow landed, it wasn't delivered by the opponent. The Tlaloc emperor himself would ascend the stone to cut out the heart, absorbing the warrior's courage directly into the empire's soul. The aftermath was as calculated as the battle. The corpse was rolled down the pyramid steps to the T's Ompantli skull rack, where artisans would drill the cranium and thread it onto wooden poles. But the Temelacatl itself demanded purification. Infrared scans of one recovered stone detected layers of powdered jade and turquoise in its pores offerings rubbed into its surface between sacrifices. The Aztecs believed the stone wasn't just an altar, but a living entity that remembered every warrior who died upon it. Some Temelacatl stones were even given names, like the legendary Cuauhxicalli of Moctezuma, said to whisper the battle cries of its victims during storms. Perhaps the most haunting insight comes from the victims' own voices. A rare set of poems attributed to captured warriors survives in the Cantares Mexicanos. One line reads, "I stride onto the stone not as a man but as the knife that sharpens the sun." These weren't the words of broken men but of warriors who'd internalized the Aztec worldview where death in Tlaloc was the ultimate apotheosis. Modern recreations using motion capture technology reveal something even more profound. The fighters' movements mirrored the volador ritual, where dancers spiraled downward from poles, symbolizing the sun's descent and rebirth. Every slash of the club, every parry, was a celestial dance in miniature. Today, as archaeologists piece together fragments of shattered Temelacatl stones, they're discovering the rituals were even more complex than historical accounts suggest. Some stones bear hidden compartments containing miniature gold weapons, perhaps votive offerings from defeated warriors. Others show microscopic wear patterns suggesting they were periodically anointed with liquid rubber, making the surface deliberately slippery to prolong the combat's agony. But the most poignant find came in 2021, when a team using ground-penetrating radar discovered a child's skeleton buried beneath a Temelacatl in Tlaloc, its hands clutching a jade figurine of a smiling warrior. Even in darkness, the Aztecs seeded hope that from every death on that blood-slick stone, new life would spring. Dust swirled through the streets of Tenochtitlan as thousands of brooms swept in frantic unison, their straw bristles scraping against stone in a cacophony that drowned out even the drums. This was Ochpanistli, the sweeping ceremony, a festival of controlled chaos where the Aztecs didn't just clean their city, they scoured it of spiritual corruption. At the heart of the frenzy stood a woman draped in the golden robes of Tosai, our grandmother, the earth goddess of healing and filth. For 20 days she'd been worshipped as divine, her every whim indulged. But as the moon reached its zenith, priests would strip her not just of her garments but of her very skin. The ritual's symbolism was as layered as the goddess herself. Tos, I represented both the nurturing earth and the grime of human existence, birth and blood, medicine and mud. The Florentine Codex depicts her with a broom in one hand and a shield in the other, embodying the Aztec belief that purification required violence. The chosen woman wasn't merely an impersonator, she became a living vessel, absorbing the city's sins into her flesh. Spanish chronicler Hernando Alvarado Tezazomoc described her final hours with macabre detail. How she danced through crowds scattering seeds, how warriors tugged ritual threads from her clothing as talismans, and how, when the moment came, her flayed skin was worn by a priest who then led a procession through the newly swept streets. Archaeology reveals how deeply this duality was etched into the city's bones. Excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered a stone box containing a female skeleton surrounded by miniature brooms made from human finger bones, likely relics from previous Ochpanistli festivals. The woman's ribs showed cut marks consistent with ritual flaying, but what startled researchers were the traces of yortli, a medicinal herb packed into her nasal cavity. This wasn't just killing, it was a metaphysical surgery, extracting impurity like a surgeon lancing a wound. The sweeping itself was no mundane chore. Murals at Teotihuacan show participants using brooms with handles carved like serpents, their strokes following sacred geometric patterns, zigzags to mimic lightning, circles to invoke the cyclical nature of time. Every dust particle carried symbolic weight. Friar Diego de Ron noted how people would intentionally scatter dirt before sweeping it away, reenacting the cosmic battle between order and chaos. Modern experiments with replica brooms found the prescribed motions created distinct sound frequencies, tones that may have been believed to scare malevolent spirits. What's often overlooked is the ritual's psychological brilliance. The chaos wasn't incidental, it was therapy. For days leading up to the sacrifice, norms were inverted: men dressed as women, rulers performed manual labor, and public shouting matches were encouraged. Psychologists now recognize this as a form of societal pressure release, where controlled transgression reinforced boundaries. The sacrifice itself acted as a reset button. The moment the priest donned Tosai's skin, the city fell silent. Recent LiDAR scans of Tenochtitlan's residential districts show a curious pattern. Refuse pits were systematically emptied just before Ochpanistli, then refilled immediately after, as if the physical cleaning mirrored spiritual renewal. The final act blurred the line between horror and hope. The flayed skin, now stretched over a wooden frame, was paraded past fields where farmers brushed it with their hands, transferring its fertile energy to the soil. A recently deciphered codex describes how the skin would gradually decompose over the next year, its decay measured by priests to predict harvest yields. Even in death, Tosai's vessel kept giving her bones ground into powder for use in healing rituals, her hair woven into the ropes that bound next year's sacrificial victims. Today, as anthropologists study contemporary Mexican barrida ceremonies where households still ritualistically sweep their homes during equinoxes, they're tracing a direct lineage to Ochpanistli. The brooms may be plastic now, the sacrifice is metaphorical, but the underlying impulse remains: to confront the dirt we can't see with tools we can. In the Aztec world, cleanliness wasn't next to godliness, it required becoming godliness, if only for one bloody, sweeping moment. The marketplace fell silent as the Pochteca merchants laid down their jade and quetzal feathers, trading wealth for something far more precious, their own breath. This was no ordinary tribute to Tlaloc. It was a carefully orchestrated performance where the most powerful men in Aztec commerce became actors in a deadly aquatic theater. Dressed in rubber-coated cotton armor that shimmered like storm clouds, they staged mock battles on rafts in Lake Texcoco, their clubs padded with orchid fibers to mimic lightning strikes. But the final act was no illusion. One by one, they allowed themselves to be defeated, toppling into waters so sacred their very touch was said to purify souls. Tribute lists from the Matricula de Huaxtzinco reveal the chilling preparations. Each participating merchant had to provide 40 pounds of natural rubber not for trade goods, but to waterproof their own skin. Archaeologists examining lakebed deposits near Tenochtitlan found sheets of this vulcanized rubber still clinging to skeletal remains, their surfaces embossed with Tlaloc's goggle-eyed visage. The rubber served a dual purpose. It slowed drowning just enough to prolong the agony, and its elasticity mirrored the stretching of storm clouds before they burst. Spanish friar Toribio de Benavent described how victims were given hallucinogenic mushrooms mixed with lake water, ensuring their final visions would be of the god himself rising from the depths to claim them. What makes this ritual uniquely disturbing is its economic dimension. These weren't coerced captives but volunteers from the Pochteca Guild, men who controlled trade routes spanning thousands of miles. The Florentine Codex shows their elaborate hierarchy, with senior merchants called ostomka overseeing the ceremonies. Surviving ledgers record how participants paid for the privilege with cacao beans and gold dust, the equivalent of modern CEOs bidding millions for sacrificial rites. A recently deciphered mural at Tlaloc marketplace depicts the drownings as inverted trade negotiations, merchants handing Tlaloc their goods in exchange not for profit but for annihilation. The ritual's aquatic staging was no accident. Lake Texcoco's saline waters preserved victims in eerie detail, their rubber suits acting like primitive diving gear that trapped pockets of air. Forensic analysis shows some struggled for nearly 20 minutes before succumbing, their lungs filling with the same salty brine that preserved the region's prized tecuitlatl algae. But the true genius of the ritual lay in its symbolism. As masters of long-distance trade, the Pochteca relied on predictable rains for their caravan survival. By drowning in Tlaloc's domain, they transformed themselves into human barter, their final breaths becoming currency to purchase favorable winds. Spanish accounts fixate on the horror, but Aztec pictorials tell a different story. The Codex Fejeverimea shows drowned merchants with flowers sprouting from their mouths, their bodies forming bridges between earthly and aquatic realms. Modern hydrologists note an unsettling pattern. Major merchant drownings often preceded the rainy season's onset, creating the illusion of causality. When researchers analyzed sediment cores from lake sacrificial sites, they found elevated mercury levels coinciding with drought periods, suggesting the ceremonies intensified when trade routes were most vulnerable. Perhaps the most poignant artifact is a child's clay whistle unearthed near the Tlaloc docks. Shaped like a merchant's pack frame, it produces a warped, bubbling tone when blown underwater, a sound that may have accompanied the ritual's final moments. For the Aztecs, commerce and sacrifice were two currents in the same river, and sometimes to keep the goods flowing, you had to let yourself sink beneath them. The scent of marigolds hung thick in the air as darkness swallowed the last light of day, not a signal of mourning, but a beacon for tiny feet that no longer touched the earth. Miquelhuatontle, the Feast of the Little Dead, was no solemn vigil. It was a riotous homecoming where Aztec families prepared feasts for souls whose lives had barely begun. Unlike the modern Dia de Muertos with its candy skulls and playful calacas, this ancient ritual pulsed with a raw, visceral energy. Parents slashed their earlobes, letting blood drip onto miniature tamales shaped like butterflies, the symbol of a child's fleeting existence, while priests scattered handfuls of tzictli, sticky chicle resin, to bind the living and dead in sweet communion. Excavations at Tlaloc's Temple of Ehecatl revealed a subterranean chamber filled with ceramic toys, whistles shaped like jaguars, spinning tops carved with stars, all smeared with traces of human hemoglobin. These weren't mere offerings, they were reactivated through blood, becoming conduits for playmates only the children could see. The Florentine Codex depicts mothers singing lullabies to empty hammocks, their voices threading through the night as if pulling invisible threads. Modern scholars analyzing these songs found eerie parallels to Nahuatl counting rhymes, suggesting each verse served to tally returning souls like beads on a cosmic abacus. The contrast with contemporary celebrations couldn't be starker. Where today's ofrendas feature sugar skulls with the deceased's name piped in icing, Aztec altars displayed real skulls of children, their eye sockets stuffed with amaranth dough and their teeth replaced with pumpkin seeds. Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún recoiled at the sight of parents laughing as they painted these skulls with bright vegetable dyes, but the Aztecs saw no contradiction. Death wasn't softened with sugar, it was embraced as another form of nurture. Recent DNA tests on skulls from Michoacán revealed something even more startling. Some belonged to the family's living children, temporarily donated to the altar before being reclaimed, a macabre game of pretend that blurred the lines between this world and the next. The ritual's climax unfolded at crossroads where the veil between worlds was thinnest. Parents buried clay figurines of owls, creatures believed to guide lost souls alongside bundles of Iztaccíhuatl, white-painted maize stalks that glowed in moonlight like skeletal fingers. Archaeologists in Xochimilco discovered these stalks arranged in precise geometric patterns mirroring the Pleiades' position during Miquelhuatl, turning entire fields into celestial maps. The most heartbreaking finds are tiny sandals, barely 4 inches long, placed facing west, the direction of the child's paradise, Chichihuacuoco, where souls suckled from divine trees until reborn. What modern observers often miss is the ritual's defiant joy. While Dia de Muertos centers on remembrance, Miquelhuatl was about reunion. Murals at Cacaxtla show barefoot children tumbling from blooming cempasúchil flowers into their parents' outstretched arms, their stone mouths forever frozen in laughter. The blood offerings weren't acts of grief, but of feeding, like mothers pressing atol to infant lips. Even the timing carried hope. Celebrated at the end of the harvest, it whispered that not all seeds must sprout immediately. Some must wait beneath the soil until their season comes. Today, as Mexican families lay out pan de muerto and photographs, the old ways linger in subtle gestures: the extra chocolate abuelita placed where a high chair once stood, the unspoken rule that no one reprimands toddlers for claiming gifts from the altar. The sugar skulls may be sweeter now, but their hollow eyes still hold the same question. What if death isn't an end, but a game of hide and seek played across centuries? The crack of bowstrings echoed across the plaza as the victim's silhouette jerked against the wooden frame, each arrow strike punctuated by the collective gasp of the crowd. This was no execution, but a sacred geometry of pain, the arrow sacrifice, where death descended not in a single blow, but in measured increments timed to the god's hunger. 16th century Friar Diego Durán captured the ritual in ink-washed illustrations that still unsettle historians. A captive spread-eagled against the curved frame of a Tz'ampantli skull rack, his body transformed into a living target. The arrows weren't randomly loosed, they followed a precise sequence: first the limbs, then the torso, finally the head, mirroring the 5 directions of the Aztec cosmos. Recent excavations at Tlaloc unearthed a Tz'ampantli base embedded with over 200 obsidian arrowheads, their positioning confirming Durán's accounts. Forensic analysis revealed something even more disturbing. Microscopic wear patterns showed some arrowheads had been retrieved and reused, their edges resharpened between sacrifices. The victim's skeletal remains told a grimmer tale: rib cages with multiple healed fractures from previous ritual battles, proving these weren't just prisoners, but seasoned warriors kept alive through months of ceremonial combat. The ritual's symbolism cut deeper than the arrows themselves. Each shaft was painted with a distinct pattern: zigzags for lightning, spirals for whirlwinds, transforming the victim's body into a living map of celestial forces. Durán described how priests anointed the arrows with a paste made from crushed scorpions and morning glory seeds, ensuring the wounds burned with supernatural intensity. Archaeologists analyzing residue on recovered arrowheads identified traces of Tlaloc, the same hallucinogenic compound given to heart sacrifice victims, suggesting the pain was meant to launch the dying into visionary states. What unsettles modern scholars most is the ritual's choreographed duration. Unlike quick heart extraction, arrow sacrifices could last hours. Duran's illustrations show attendants using feather fans to keep the victim conscious as blood pooled beneath the frame. The Florentine Codex reveals the grim practicality behind this. The Aztecs believed the longer the soul struggled to escape the body, the more spiritual energy it released. Recent 3D reconstructions of the T's Ampantli frame show its curvature wasn't just for display. It functioned like a gruesome musical instrument. The taut ropes holding the victim would vibrate with each arrow impact, producing a low thrum that priests interpreted as divine speech. The aftermath blurred the line between veneration and violence. Excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered a cache of arrow-pierced clay figurines wrapped in Magi fiber miniature stand-ins for warriors who couldn't be captured. Some skeletal remains show arrowheads deliberately snapped off inside bones, their obsidian fragments left to mingle with the victim's marrow. The message was clear: even in death, the warrior's essence remained bound to the ritual. Perhaps most haunting are the accounts of the arrow's final destination. After the victim's death, priests would retrieve the bloodied projectiles and hurl them toward the 4 cardinal directions, a physical projection of the sacrificed energy. Duran recorded witnesses describing how these arrows sometimes disappeared mid-flight, swallowed by what observers claimed were invisible hands. Modern experiments with replicas suggest the obsidian's refractive properties could create eerie optical effects at dawn or dusk, making the shafts appear to vanish against certain backdrops. The arrow sacrifice wasn't just about killing, it was about transformation through controlled destruction. Each twang of the bowstring marked another note in a cosmic symphony, each wound a voluntary breach through which divine forces could enter our world. When archaeologists recently recreated the ritual using ballistic gel dummies, they discovered something the Aztecs likely knew intuitively. Arrows striking at precise angles produced harmonic vibrations in the T's Ampantli ropes, frequencies that matched the tonal range of ceremonial flutes. In the Aztec world, even death had perfect pitch. The drums pulsed with the feverish rhythm of midsummer as women clad in flower-entwined robes ascended the pyramid, their wrists bound with garlands instead of rope. This was Xipe Totec, the great feast of the lords, where the Aztecs turned sacrifice into a grotesque parody of marriage, the bridal procession leading not to matrimony but to the obsidian blade. At the heart of the ceremony stood Xochiquetzal, goddess of erotic love and weaving, whose dual domains of fertility and artistry collided in a ritual more chilling than any battlefield execution. Spanish chronicler Hernando Alvarado Tezazamoc described victims chosen for their beauty, their skin painted with indigo swirls mimicking the whirl of spindles, their hair braided with cotton threads that would soon unravel along with their lives. Archaeological excavations at the Templo Mayor revealed the ritual's haunting signature: dozens of spindle walls buried with female skeletons, each carved with glyphs of the goddess. Unlike warriors' graves filled with weapons, these graves cradled tools of creation: delicate bone needles, bundles of dyed thread, even miniature looms no larger than a handspan. The most poignant discovery came in 2018, when researchers found a young woman's skeleton with a spindle still clutched in her left hand, the thread leading upward to a clay figurine of Xochiquetzal placed deliberately over her heart. Forensic analysis showed traces of cochineal dye under her fingernails, proof she'd spent her final hours spinning scarlet thread, perhaps weaving her own death shroud. The festival's symbolism wove together sex and sacrifice with unsettling precision. Xochiquetzal wasn't just the patron of weavers, she governed carnal desire, making her victims living metaphors for the tension between creation and destruction. Codices depict priests draping sacrificial women in backstrap looms before leading them to the altar, their bodies literally fused with their tools. Murals at Teotihuacan show the goddess herself holding a heart in one hand and a spindle in the other, the dripping blood morphing into thread as it falls. Modern textile experts note the victims' burial walls are weighted for fine spun thread, the kind used not for everyday cloth, but for the sheer veils that adorn temple statues. These women weren't just killed, they were transformed into human shuttles, their life force threaded through the cosmic loom. What unsettles historians most is the ritual's inversion of domesticity. Unlike warriors who fought before dying, these women performed acts of nurturing until the last moment. The Florentine Codex describes them grinding maize, kneading dough, and serving chocolate to priests' chores that mimicked bridal preparations. Excavated middens near sacrificial sites contain unusual concentrations of vanilla pods and cacao residue, suggesting the victims consumed ritually significant foods. One skeleton found in 2016 had her molars packed with Tlaloc, an orchid used to flavor chocolate, her jaw frozen mid-chew. The Aztecs saw this as sacred symmetry. Just as women transformed raw maize into sustenance, their deaths would transform cosmic energy into renewal. The climax blurred the line between adoration and annihilation. After heart extraction, priests didn't discard the bodies. They flayed them, stretching the skin over wooden frames resembling looms. Doron recorded that these grisly tapestries were displayed in Xochiquetzal's temple, with spindles placed where hands should be. Recent spectroscopic analysis of mural pigments confirmed a macabre detail. The red paint used for temple murals contained hemoglobin, likely harvested from these very sacrifices. Even in death, the women's artistry continued, their blood literally coloring the walls where future generations would worship. Today, modern weavers in Oaxaca still invoke Xochiquetzal's name when warping their looms, though few realize the dark origins of the tradition. The spindle walls unearthed by archaeologists aren't mere relics, they're frozen moments where life and death spun on the same axis. When ethnographers interview elderly thread makers who still murmur prayers over their work, they catch echoes of Xipe Totec, not as horror, but as testament to how deeply creation and destruction once twined together. The goddess demanded beauty, but in the Aztec world, beauty always required a willing surrender to the knife. The priests emerged from the temple's inner sanctum unrecognizable, their bodies gleaming like polished obsidian, every inch of skin stained a pitch black as if they'd stepped out of the night itself. This was no mere costume, it was a metamorphosis for the funerary rites of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, the god who saw all yet hid his true form in shadows. The Codex Borgia captures the ritual's eerie precision, priests crouching over braziers of burning copal resin, gathering soot on their palms before smearing it across their faces, chests, and limbs in spiraling patterns that mirrored the god's celestial twin, the black void of the night sky. What made this act so unsettling was its intimacy. Unlike sacrifices performed on stone altars, this ritual required priests to mar their own flesh, becoming living mirrors of Tezcatlipoca's essence. The soot wasn't just ash, it was teal lily, the sacred black pigment mixed with ground magnetite to give it an uncanny metallic sheen. Archaeologists analyzing residue in funerary braziers found traces of rubber mixed with the soot, a binding agent that ensured the stain wouldn't fade even under sweat or tears. The effect was transformative. Under torchlight, the priests' bodies would shimmer like the god's own obsidian mirror, their movements leaving faint streaks of darkness in the air like smoke. The Codex Borgia reveals the ritual's deeper symbolism. In one haunting panel, a priest kneels with his blackened hands pressed against a reflective pool, his distorted reflection morphing into Tezcatlipoca's jaguar-like visage. This wasn't theatrical roleplay, it was a metaphysical fusion. Aztec cosmology held that darkness wasn't empty, it was teeming with unseen forces. By staining themselves, priests became conduits for those forces, their blackened skin acting as a membrane between worlds. Modern conservators working with the Codex discovered something even more startling. The black paint used in these illustrations contains microscopic fragments of volcanic glass, identical to the material used in real Tezcatlipoca mirrors. Every brushstroke was a ritual in miniature. The process itself was a trial. Surviving accounts describe how priests fasted for days beforehand, their lips cracking as they chanted hymns to numb the discomfort of soot clogging their pores. The final layer was applied with the thorns of the decapitations plant, dragging them across the skin to etch sacred glyphs into the blackened flesh. Forensic analysis of excavated priestly remains in Tlaloc shows telltale scarring beneath the collarbones, evidence of this ritual tattooing, where dark pigment seeped into the wounds to create permanent markings. But the true revelation came in 2019 when chemists recreated the tea lily mixture. Under UV light, the compound glowed faintly blue, a property the Aztecs couldn't have understood scientifically, but which aligned perfectly with their belief that Tezcatlipoca's power shimmered just beyond human sight. During night vigils, the priests wouldn't just be black-clad mourners. They'd be spectral figures, their bodies absorbing firelight while the glyphs on their skin pulsed with an otherworldly luminescence. The rite's conclusion was as deliberate as its preparation. After 3 days, the priests would wade into Lake Texcoco at dawn, letting the water dissolve the soot in swirling black clouds. The Codex Borgia shows these clouds forming the face of Tezcatlipoca as they dispersed, a final reminder that even in purification, the god's presence lingered. Today, descendants in parts of Guerrero still practice a diluted version of this ritual during solar eclipses, smearing charcoal on their skin to balance the light. The echoes persist not as superstition, but as a testament to how deeply the Aztecs understood darkness, not as absence, but as a sacred canvas waiting to be filled. As the final days of the solar year slipped away like sand through an hourglass, the temples of Tenochtitlan filled with the rustle of sacred craftsmanship. Priests and artisans labored over delicate effigies no larger than a handspan, intricate gods woven from bark paper and painted with vibrant vegetable dyes. These weren't mere dolls, but vessels holding the accumulated weight of a year's prayers, sins, and celestial debts. When the sun reached its nadir during the winter solstice, these paper deities would meet a fate both terrifying and transformative, consumed by flames in a ceremony known as Tititle, the burning of the gods. The Florentine Codex preserves the ritual's haunting choreography. Effigies representing over 100 deities were arranged in precise cosmological order. Huitzilopochtli at the center, flanked by Tlaloc storm clouds and Xipe Totec's flayed skins, each positioned to mirror their celestial counterparts. Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún described how priests anointed the figures with uli, a rubber sap that made them flammable, while chanting hymns comparing the act to the sun's daily death by fire. What seemed like destruction was actually renewal. Just as the sun rose reborn from its own ashes, so too would the god's power be amplified through ritual combustion. Archaeologists digging near the Templo Mayor's sacred precinct uncovered a trove of surviving fragments, paper shards carbonized at the edges, but still bearing traces of blue mire and red cochineal pigments. Spectral imaging revealed these weren't generic representations, but personalized avatars. One fragment shows Quetzalcoatl's feathered serpent with a unique spiral pattern matching a mural in Texcoco's royal palace, suggesting effigies were tailored to specific communities. Another bears fingerprints in Chapapote asphalt, likely from a priest pressing symbols of destiny onto the paper skin. The burning itself was a masterclass in sacred theater. Instead of a single bonfire, priests kindled dozens of small ceramic braziers arranged in the shape of the Xicocoleuqui, the stepped fret symbolizing cyclical time. Each effigy was fed to the flames in reverse order of creation, first the deities of the present era, then those of previous suns, until only Omteotl, the primordial dual god, remained. Eyewitness accounts describe how the floating ashes formed shapes observers swore were divine faces, while the smell of burning copal mixed with charred paper created a scent believed to open pathways to the spirit world. What modern scholars find most revealing is how Tititle intertwined with the new fire ceremony's grander cycle. While the 52-year festival renewed the cosmic engine, this annual rite serviced its moving parts. Surviving calendar wheels depict the two events as interlocking, gears the burning of effigies releasing small bursts of energy to keep time's machinery humming between major overhauls. Recent carbon dating of bark paper fragments confirms they were harvested in 52-year intervals, linking each burning to a specific new fire cycle like pages in a divine ledger. The ritual's legacy lingers in Mexico's Quema de Judas tradition, where effigies are still torched during Easter, a colonial adaptation that unwittingly preserves the Aztec belief that some transformations require the cleansing kiss of flame. When conservators at the National Anthropology Museum examine the charred paper remnants under ultraviolet light, they detect something the conquistadors missed: nearly invisible glyphs along the burn edges reading Amo Ixpalahui, it is not lost. A fitting epitaph for a civilization that saw eternity not in preservation, but in purposeful surrender to fire's alchemy. The drums pounded like warring heartbeats as two warriors circled each other on the stone platform, one bare-chested and painted with crimson stripes, the other dragging a chain that tethered his ankle to a central post. This was no ordinary duel, but Xochitl, the Flowery War, where captivity and combat twisted together in a sacred paradox. These battles, staged across the empire's ritual arenas, weren't fought for land or gold, but for something far more precious: the chance to die beautifully. Aerial footage of Xochicalco's ruins reveals the chilling geometry of these combat platforms, circular and sunken, with grooves carved into the stone to channel blood toward ceremonial drains. They were designed as both stage and altar. Unlike the chaotic battlefields of European conquests, every detail here was calibrated the length of the chain, allowing exactly 7 paces of movement, the platform's slope ensuring spectators could witness each grimace. Archaeologists mapping these sites found something unexpected. The stones themselves bore microscopic wear patterns from repeated scrubbing, proof that after each death the stage was scoured clean to welcome the next performer. The warriors who fought here were no random captives. Surviving tribute lists from cities like Tlaxcala show meticulous records of champions offered for Xochitl, their names accompanied by battle accolades. These men weren't dragged in shame but paraded like living sculptures, their bodies adorned with Yortli petals and ocelot fur. Spanish chronicler Diego de Ron described how some captives were given teocalli, a fermented ceremonial drink, not to dull their senses but to heighten their awareness of the sacred theater they inhabited. Skeletons excavated near Xochicalco confirm this: teeth filed with hematite dust, a stimulant that would have made their final moments vibrate with surreal clarity. What unsettles modern scholars most is the ritual's psychological depth. The chains weren't just physical restraints, they symbolized the tether between mortal and divine. Murals at Cacaxtla show combatants' bindings morphing into flowering vines, illustrating the Aztec belief that limitation could breed transcendence. The weapons, too, were curated paradoxes: obsidian-studded macuahudal clubs sharp enough to decapitate a horse, paired with feather-covered shields too small for real defense. This wasn't about fairness, but about forcing elegance under duress, like a poet composing verses while standing on lava. The aftermath blurred the line between slaughter and sacrament. Victors didn't gloat, they knelt beside their fallen foes to collect blood in jade vials, which were then offered to statues of Xipe Totec. Forensic analysis of these vials reveals a grisly detail. Many contain traces of teas, ortli, a binding gum mixed with the blood to create a sacred adhesive. This glue was used to affix turquoise mosaics onto deity masks, turning each warrior's essence into literal divine ornamentation. Perhaps the most haunting legacy lies in the ruins' acoustics. When archaeologists recreated the combat chains using replicas, they discovered the links produced a melodic clinking when moved, a dissonant counterpoint to the drums. Combined with the platform's resonance, each step would have generated an eerie soundtrack, as if the stones themselves were singing the warriors toward their inevitable end. Today, as drones circle Xochicalco's silent stages, the absence of blood and noise feels almost blasphemous. The Aztecs understood something we've largely forgotten. That ritual isn't about sterilizing death, but about holding it close enough to feel its breath and finding, in that intimacy, a fleeting glimpse of the divine. The night sky above Tenochtitlan burned with more than stars as victims tumbled into the roaring flames, their bodies becoming earthly echoes of the 400 drunken gods who once fell from the heavens. This was the sacrifice of the Mimicscoa, a ritual ripped straight from the pages of the Codex Chimalpopoca, where myth and mortality collided in a shower of embers. According to legend, the Mimicscoa were celestial warriors, divine siblings who grew reckless after drinking pulque until the sun god Huitzilopochtli cast them down like meteors. Now, every 52 years, the Aztecs reenacted this cosmic purge, selecting victims whose drunken staggers mirrored the star's fatal descent. The ritual's preparation was as meticulous as it was macabre. Priests scoured the empire for captives with a specific trait, the ability to hold liquor without collapsing. These chosen ones were then pampered for months, fed a diet of mushrooms and fermented agave to heighten their tolerance. Spanish chronicler Jerónimo de Mendieta described how they'd be paraded through the streets slurring hymns, their cheeks stained red with achiote to mimic the flushed faces of the original drunken stars. But the true horror began at midnight when the victims were led to a circular pit lined with tezontal volcanic rock, its jagged edges glowing orange from the fire below. The Codex Chimalpopoca holds the key to understanding the ritual's chilling precision. Its star maps don't just chart constellations, they prescribe sacrificial choreography. One illustrated page shows figures tumbling headfirst into flames, their limbs arranged to mirror the Mimicscoa's positions during their mythical fall. Archaeologists excavating the Templo Mayor's periphery found a stone disc etched with matching constellations, its surface pitted from centuries of scorching heat. Forensic analysis revealed something even darker. The pit's sediment layers contained traces of magnesium, a mineral that would have made the flames burn blue-white, mimicking the cold fire of stars. What happened next defied European comprehension. Instead of being pushed, victims jumped, some laughing, others singing, as priests chanted verses from the Codex, "As they fell then, so you fall now." Eyewitness accounts describe how the fire was stoked with ocote pine to create towering flames that swallowed bodies whole, the heat so intense it vaporized flesh before bones could blacken. But the Aztecs weren't just burning people, they were forging celestial links. The rising smoke carried names. Each victim had been renamed after a star in the Mimicscoa constellation, their death a fiery telegram to the gods. Modern astronomers have pinpointed the eerie accuracy behind this ritual. The Mimicscoa myth corresponds to the Pleiades' annual descent toward the horizon, an event the Aztecs marked as the drunken stars' fall. By timing sacrifices to this celestial movement, they created a gruesome astronomical clock. Recent LiDAR scans of sacrificial pits show they were aligned to frame the Pleiades' descent. Victims entered the flames just as the cluster touched the temple rooftops. The Codex Chimalpopoca even encodes this timing in its glyphs, a star symbol dripping liquid fire, positioned beside a numeral representing the exact angle of descent. The aftermath blurred the lines between destruction and deification. Instead of scattering ashes, priests collected them in cloth sacks woven from megi fibers, the same plant used to make pulque. These sacks were then tied to spears and planted upright in temple courtyards, where wind would scatter the remains across the city. Murals at Teotihuacan depict this moment with haunting beauty, ash swirling into the night like a reverse snowfall, each speck a reborn star returning to the sky. Today, anthropologists studying descendants' rituals in rural Hidalgo have found echoes of the Mimicscoa sacrifice. During the Festival of the Falling Stars, villagers still toss bundles of burning ocote into ravines, a symbolic recreation of that ancient celestial plunge. The flames may be smaller now, the names of gods replaced with whispered prayers, but the longing remains the same, to touch the cosmos even if it means burning in its reflection. The scent of roasting maize filled the air as families gathered around hearths, not to prepare an ordinary meal, but to enact a sacred communion with the gods themselves. This was Izcalli, the growth festival, where the line between sustenance and worship blurred into something extraordinary. At the heart of the ritual lay small, intricately molded figures, miniature effigies of deities crafted from corn dough, their features painstakingly shaped by the hands of grandmothers and children alike. These weren't mere edible decorations, they were vessels of Xintiotl, the god who didn't just govern maize. He was maize, his divine essence woven into every kernel that sustained the Aztec world. The preparation of these dough deities was a ritual in itself. Women ground the season's last sacred maize on stone metates, chanting prayers that traced the crop's journey from seed to stalk. The Florentine Codex captures the intimacy of this act, fingers pressing nixtamalized dough into wooden molds carved with the faces of Tlaloc, Xipe Totec, and of course Xintiotl, his visage framed by sprouting tendrils. Archaeologists excavating household shrines have found these molds buried beneath sleeping mats, their surfaces worn smooth from generations of use. One particularly poignant discovery in Texcoco revealed a child's handprint fossilized in dried dough beside a crudely shaped corn god, evidence that even the youngest participated in this edible theology. The roasting transformed the ritual into multisensory worship. As the figures blackened over clay comals, their sweet, nutty aroma carried profound symbolism. To the Aztecs, the crackling of the dough mirrored the sound of the earth breaking open to release new growth, while the rising steam became Xintiotl's breath returning to the heavens. Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún recorded a haunting detail. Families would deliberately let portions of the effigies char, believing the blackened bits held concentrated divine energy. Modern chemists analyzing residue from ceremonial comals found traces of chapapote, a sacred asphalt, mixed into the dough to enhance flammability, proving this wasn't accidental but calculated reverence. What made Izcalli unique was its democratic spirituality. Unlike temple sacrifices reserved for priests, this ritual unfolded in every home, from emperors' palaces to farmers' huts. Excavated middens across Mesoamerica contained tiny clay braziers no larger than a fist, each bearing soot marks from roasting these corn deities. The message was clear: sacred nourishment knew no class. Even the act of consumption followed sacred geometry. Parents would break the effigies along scored lines representing the 4 cardinal directions, distributing fragments according to age and status. Elders received the head wisdom, warriors the limbs strength, children the heart potential. The spiritual stakes were sky high. The Aztecs believed maize wasn't just a crop, but the literal flesh of Xintiotl, who had allowed himself to be dismembered so humanity might eat. Murals at Teotihuacan depict the god's body transforming into a cornfield, his fingers sprouting as ears of maize. By eating his effigy, families didn't just commemorate this myth, they reenacted it, their teeth replaying the primordial act of divine fragmentation. Forensic analysis of dental calculus from Aztec remains shows an astonishing detail. Many teeth bear grooves from repeatedly biting down on hard chapapote fragments, proof these rituals weren't annual exceptions, but devotional habits woven into daily life. Perhaps most striking is how Izcalli's legacy endures. Modern Mexican families still mold figuras de masa during seasonal festivals, though few recognize their Aztec roots. When anthropologists interviewed elderly tortilla makers in Puebla who instinctively pinch crosses into dough before cooking, they uncovered a subconscious echo of that ancient belief, that every meal containing maize is a fleeting reunion with the god who became food to feed his children. The hearth fires may be gas now, the molds mass-produced plastic, but the act remains fundamentally unchanged. taking the sacred into one's body bite by reverent bite. The drums beat a feverish rhythm as figures draped in sagging, rotting flesh twirled through the temple plaza, their movements made grotesque by the human skins sloughing from their bodies. This was the Xipe, the dance of the priests, a ritual so viscerally disturbing that even battle-hardened Spanish conquistadors recoiled in horror. Diego Duran's 16th-century account captures the scene with nauseating clarity. Priests clad in the flayed hides of sacrificial victims, the skin's empty eye sockets and gaping mouths distorting with each pirouette, while the stench of decay hung thick enough to choke the sun itself. What seemed like macabre theater was actually a profound theological act. The dancers weren't just wearing death. They were embodying the Aztec belief that life sprouted from decomposition. Modern reconstructions reveal the grueling reality behind Duran's descriptions. When experimental archaeologists recreated the ritual using pigskin, the closest analog to human tissue, they discovered the hide stiffened within hours, forcing dancers to move in jerky, unnatural motions. The weight of decaying flesh pulled at their shoulders, while trapped heat and moisture created a breeding ground for bacteria. Within 2 days, the stench became unbearable, and the skins cracked like old parchment with every movement. But the Aztec priests endured this for up to 20 days, a testament to their fanatical devotion. Forensic analysis of excavated priestly remains shows telltale spinal deformities consistent with carrying such burdens year after year. The dance's symbolism was as layered as the rotting skins themselves. Each flayed hide represented Xipe Totec, the flayed lord, whose annual rebirth required a literal wearing of death. Codices depict the dancer's movements mimicking maize sprouting from soil, the priest's stiff, jerky steps mirroring the plant's struggle through the earth. Duran noted a chilling detail. As the skins dried, they tightened around the wearers like second skeletons, turning the priests into living cadavers. The effect was deliberate. The Aztecs saw this transformation as the ultimate act of reciprocity, where humans shared in the suffering they inflicted on the crops they harvested. What Duran misunderstood was the ritual's emotional complexity. Recent translations of Nahuatl hymns reveal the dancers didn't just endure their ordeal, they celebrated it. One verse describes the priests laughing as maggots dropped from their costumes, interpreting the insects as new life being born from our devotion. Murals at El Tajan show spectators catching these maggots in ceramic bowls, burying them in their fields as fertility charms. The dance wasn't mere mortification. It was a perverse kind of gardening where human agony became the fertilizer for cosmic renewal. The climax of Xipe blurred the lines between sacrifice and sacrament. After weeks of dancing, priests would peel off the putrid skins, now brittle as autumn leaves, and stuff them into stone vessels shaped like grinning mouths. Excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered dozens of these receptacles, their interiors stained with collagen and fatty acids from decomposing tissue. But the most revelatory find came in 2021, a child's burial containing miniature flayed skin costumes, complete with tiny obsidian knives for peeling. Even in death, the Aztecs prepared their young for the dance's terrible truth that divinity wasn't just worshipped, but worn until it cracked and bled and birthed the world anew. The massive stone vessel loomed in the temple plaza, 8 tons of polished basalt carved into the sinuous curves of a jaguar poised to pounce. This was no ordinary altar, but a Quetzalcoatl, the sacred eagle gourd, designed to hold the still steaming hearts ripped from sacrificial victims. When archaeologists first uncovered this particular vessel beneath Mexico City's Zocalo, they were stunned by its precision. The jaguar's open mouth formed a perfect basin, its obsidian-inlaid eyes tracking the sun's path like a celestial compass. Every detail served a dual purpose. The stone's natural flecks of pyrite sparkled like stars when blood pooled in sunlight, while the hollow chamber beneath the vessel amplified the liquids dripping into an echoing drumbeat. The Quetzalcoatl wasn't merely a container, it was a cosmic engine, solar alignments revealed during excavations showed the jaguar's spine aligned perfectly with the equinox sunrise, casting a shadow that sliced the vessel in half, a symbolic opening of its belly to release divine energy. Murals from Teotihuacan depict priests placing hearts inside these vessels as if feeding a living creature, the organ's final contractions believed to generate tonally, the life force that powered the sun's journey. Modern laser scans of the Tenochtitlan Cuauhxicalli confirmed something even more astonishing. Microscopic channels carved beneath the surface directed blood flow in spiral patterns mirroring the Milky Way, turning each sacrifice into a microcosm of celestial motion. What truly chills the blood are the vessel's hidden acoustics. When researchers poured liquid into the basin, they discovered the grooves produced a gurgling resonance at 783 Hz, the same frequency as Earth's natural electromagnetic field. To the Aztecs, this vibration wasn't coincidence. It was the jaguar's growl, proof the vessel was a conduit for Tezcatlipoca's voice. The Florentine Codex describes priests crouching beside the Cuauhxicalli during eclipses, their ears pressed to the stone as they interpreted these sounds into prophecies. The most haunting relic lies not in the vessel's size but in its stains. Spectral analysis revealed layers of hemoglobin, iron, and chalchihuitl ground jade, embedded deep in the porous stone, a cocktail of sacred materials mixing with the essence of countless victims. In the Aztec world, this wasn't desecration but alchemy. The Cuauhxicalli grew more powerful with each offering, its stone digesting sacrifices like the earth consumes the dead. Today, as the jaguar vessel sits silent in the National Anthropology Museum, its empty maw still seems to whisper the same truth the Aztecs carved into its flanks. That divinity isn't given, but forged one beating heart at a time. The massive sun stone loomed over the great temple, its concentric circles not merely decoration but a dire prophecy carved in stone. According to the Aztecs, the universe had already been destroyed and remade 4 times, each collapse marked by the death of a sun. The current era, the 5th sun, was fated to end in a cataclysm of earthquakes and famine, its demise foretold in the sun stone's intricate glyphs. Every sacrifice, from the humblest offering to the grandest ceremonial slaughter, was a desperate attempt to postpone that inevitable doom. The stone's central figure, the sun god Tanatia, clutches human hearts in his claws, his tongue lolling like a knife, a visceral demand for nourishment. Surrounding him, 4 previous suns stare blankly from their quadrants, each labeled with the calamity that erased its epoch. Jaguars devouring the first sun, hurricane winds toppling the second, fiery rain consuming the third, and floodwaters drowning the fourth. Modern astronomers have noted an unnerving coincidence. These disasters loosely align with real cosmic threats: asteroid impacts, solar flares, volcanic winters, and rising sea levels. The Aztecs couldn't have known the science, but their mythology eerily mirrors Earth's existential dangers. Sacrifices tied to the 5th sun weren't random acts of brutality. They were timed to celestial events with chilling precision. Spanish chronicles describe the binding of the years ceremony, held every 52 years when the solar and sacred calendars aligned. Priests would extinguish every fire in the empire, plunging cities into darkness, a symbolic death of the sun. If the gods accepted their offerings, a new fire was kindled in a captive's chest, its flames carried to relight hearths across the land. Failure meant the 5th sun's collapse had begun. Excavations near the sun stone's original site revealed pits filled with charred remains, their bones radiocarbon dated to cluster around these 52-year cycles. NASA solar data adds a haunting layer to this ancient dread. The sun operates on an 11-year cycle of increasing and decreasing activity, with peaks marked by violent flares and coronal mass ejections, precisely the kind of fiery rain the Aztecs feared. In 2012, a massive solar storm narrowly missed Earth. Had it struck, it could have triggered global blackouts and fried satellites. the sunstone's apocalyptic imagery suddenly feels less like myth and more like a warning encoded in stone. The Aztecs didn't just fear the end, they prepared for it. Murals at Tlaloc depict priests wearing mirrors on their backs to reflect sunlight upward, as if physically propping up the sun. Ceramic vessels buried in ceremonial caches contain seeds of drought-resistant crops, suggesting practical preparations alongside ritual ones. Even the act of sacrifice mirrored their cosmology. Victims' blood was called chalchihuatl, precious water, because the sun needed liquid to survive its daily journey across the sky. Today, as astrophysicists track asteroids and governments draft pandemic response plans, we're not so different from the Aztecs staring at the sunstone. Our rituals have changed: subway commutes instead of bloodletting, emergency drills instead of new fire ceremonies, but the underlying terror remains. The stone's message transcends centuries. Civilization is always one catastrophe away from dissolution, and every act of preservation, no matter how small, is a rebellion against the void. The Chosen One emerged from the temple dressed in quetzal feathers and jade, his very footsteps considered sacred as he walked through Tenochtitlan's streets. This was no mere mortal. He had become Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, living among his people as an Ixiptla, a divine impersonator. For an entire year, he wore the god's regalia, ate from golden plates, and held court where nobles knelt before him. Yet this godhood had an expiration date. When the Feast of Toxcatl arrived, his golden bracelets would be stripped away, his divine mask shattered, and his still-beating heart offered to the sun. The Aztecs didn't just worship their gods, they resurrected them in flesh and blood, only to destroy them in a cycle of sacred theater. The Florentine Codex preserves heartbreaking details of these living deities' final days. Quetzalcoatl's Ixiptla spent his last month playing a haunting melody on clay flutes, breaking one each week until none remained, a musical countdown to his death. Meanwhile, Xipe Totec's impersonator endured a far grimmer fate. Chosen for his unblemished skin, he was flayed alive after 20 days of being worshipped. His raw body paraded through fields so farmers could touch his wounds and absorb their fertile power. Where Quetzalcoatl's double died with poetic grace, his heart cut out swiftly on the temple stairs, Xipe Totec endured agony until his skin could be peeled off whole like a gruesome suit. Archaeology confirms the stark contrast in their treatment. Excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered 2 burial pits barely 50 feet apart, one containing the skeleton of a young man surrounded by shattered flutes and jade beads, his ribs showing the clean cut of a sacrificial blade. The other held bones still clad in fragments of decomposing skin, the finger joints twisted as if clawing at the air. The differences didn't end with death. Quetzalcoatl's impersonator was mourned with poetry, comparing his sacrifice to the morning star vanishing at dawn, while Xipe Totec became literal fertilizer, his rotting flesh suit dragged through crops until it disintegrated. What's often overlooked is how these rituals mirrored the god's own myths. Quetzalcoatl, the wise bringer of civilization, demanded a refined, almost melancholy sacrifice, his Ixiptla learning sacred songs and astronomy during his divine tenure. Xipe Totec, the flayed lord of renewal, required suffering so visceral it turned the stomach even of seasoned conquistadors. Murals at Teotihuacan capture this duality. One panel shows the feathered serpent's impersonator ascending calmly to the heavens, while the adjacent wall depicts Xipe Totec's double mid-flaying, his scream frozen in painted stucco. The psychological toll on those who interacted with these living gods reveals another layer. Spanish accounts describe mothers bringing sick children to touch Quetzalcoatl's Ixiptla, believing his temporary divinity could heal. But the same records note how priests avoided eye contact with Xipe Totec's impersonator in his final hours, not out of disgust but fear. To acknowledge his pain was to confront the brutal truth behind their cosmology, that life sprouted not from gentle prayers but from excruciating transformation. Perhaps the most poignant artifact sits in Mexico City's National Museum, a child-sized Xipe Totec costume, its stitched leather designed to mimic flayed skin. Tiny handprints still visible in the lining suggest it was worn in training rituals, preparing the next generation for their unthinkable role. Beside it lies a broken flute from Quetzalcoatl's last Ixiptla, its mouthpiece stained blue with Huitzquilital dye, the color of sacrifice. Together, they whisper the Aztecs' unbearable truth, that gods walk among us but never for long. Moonlight pooled like liquid silver around the Tlaloc shrine as the midnight ceremony began, not with chants or drums but with an eerie, expectant silence. Deep within the temple complex, priests gathered around ceramic vessels shaped like the storm god's goggle-eyed visage, their contents far more potent than rainwater. Recent residue analysis on these vessels tells a startling story. Traces of Tionanacatl, the flesh of the gods, hallucinogenic mushrooms that opened a doorway to Tlaloc's realm. Spanish Inquisition records, desperate to stamp out these rituals, inadvertently preserved their details. Friar Toribio de Benavent described participants consuming blackened fungi that made them sea devils in the mist, while indigenous accounts spoke of transforming into rain-soaked jaguars, their visions synced to the thunder's cadence. The chemistry of these rituals was as precise as it was sacred. Gas chromatography of temple vessels revealed not just psilocybin, but a carefully calibrated cocktail mushrooms mixed with Ololiuqui morning glory seeds and Yachtli Mexican tarragon, amplifying their effects while curbing nausea. Archaeologists found miniature mushroom stones buried beneath the shrine's floor, each carved with glyphs representing different weather patterns. These weren't mere mortars for grinding. They were ritual keys, their shapes corresponding to specific cloud formations priests sought to summon. One vessel, discovered in 2018, had residue forming a perfect circle inside, evidence it held a single, massive dose meant for shared communion, likely sipped through hollow reed straws to ensure equal distribution. The ceremonies followed a lunar timetable. Spanish records note that gatherings peaked during the Atlcahualo drought season, when the moon was waning, a time the Aztecs believed Tlaloc's thirst was greatest. Participants would fast for days beforehand, their bodies cleansed to receive visions more clearly. Murals at Teotihuacan depict the ritual stages, priests with mushroom-shaped pupils kneeling as spiraling vapors rose from vessels, their arms outstretched to catch spectral raindrops only they could see. Forensic analysis of skeletal remains from Tlaloc's priesthood reveals telltale dental wear patterns, grooves on the teeth from clenching during psychedelic trances, and enamel eroded by frequent vomiting, a side effect they interpreted as purging earthly impurities. What unfolded in those moonlit chambers defies modern categorization. Inquisition documents describe participants speaking in tongues like rushing water, while indigenous codices show priests wearing jade masks that wept with actual water channels, sinking their tears to hallucinated storms. The most chilling account comes from a rare Nahuatl manuscript hidden for centuries, a priest's first-hand description of feeling his bones dissolve into mist before Tlaloc appeared as a towering figure of liquid obsidian, demanding sacrifices not of blood but of the fire inside the mind. The ritual's aftermath was as calculated as its preparation. Vessels were sealed with rubber caps to trap residual spiritual energy, then buried in concentric circles matching Tlaloc's sacred geometry. Modern excavations reveal these caches often contain Teotihuacan, toxic salamander paste believed to ground participants returning from the spirit world. Some priests were interred with mushroom-shaped jade plugs in their nostrils, a final barrier against escaping visions. Today, ethnobotanists studying Mazatec shamans' rituals recognize uncanny parallels. The same mushroom species, similar preparatory fasts, even matching visions of water deities. But the Aztecs took it further. Their ceremonies weren't just personal enlightenment, they were meteorological negotiations where altered states became bargaining chips with the storm god himself. When the first rains fell after these rituals, it wasn't seen as coincidence, but as Tlaloc's handwritten reply, inked across the sky in droplets and lightning. The obsidian butterfly knife gleamed under torchlight as the priest raised it toward the constellation of the Scorpion, its wings so finely carved they seemed to flutter against the night sky. This was no ordinary blade, but the sacred instrument of Xipe, the obsidian butterfly, a star-dwelling goddess who ruled over both celestial wonders and the most terrifying of sacrifices. The British Museum's mixed-style artifact, barely 6 inches long, tells a story far deadlier than its delicate form suggests. Its edges, magnified under modern microscopes, reveal grooves designed not just for cutting, but for channeling blood in precise streams, each droplet a tribute to the stars above. Xipe's cult operated under the cover of darkness, her priests identifiable only by the obsidian wing pendants that caught moonlight like signals. Unlike the sun-worshipping Huitzilopochtli rituals, these ceremonies peaked during the dry season when the Milky Way arched clearest over Tenochtitlan. The goddess herself was a paradox, part maternal protector of deceased children, part vampiric warrior who fed on the life force of captives. Murals at Tizatlan depict her as a skeletal figure with knife-edged wings, her claws clutching human hearts as if plucking fruit from some nightmarish orchard. The ritual's signature act was as precise as it was gruesome. Victims were strapped to a stone slab shaped like a butterfly's open wings, their spines aligned with the carving's central axis. Using the ceremonial knife, priests would make twin incisions along the ribs, not deep enough to kill immediately, but designed to mimic the insect's wing veins. As blood welled in the grooves, it formed a ghastly living replica of Xipe's silhouette. Spanish chronicler Hernando Ruiz de Alarcón, who infiltrated one such ceremony, described how the priests would then harvest the still dripping blood in jade bowls, sprinkling it toward the stars while chanting Mayakuzale, more brightness, a plea to keep the constellations from fading at dawn. What makes this ritual uniquely chilling is its connection to Mixtec astronomy. The British Museum knife's handle bears a glyph matching the Aztec date for the heliacal rising of Scorpius, proof these sacrifices were timed to celestial events with mathematical precision. Excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered a stela showing Xipe hovering above a solar eclipse, her wings blotting out the sun. Forensic astronomers have since confirmed the depicted alignment occurred in 1466, coinciding with a surge in sacrificial remains bearing the telltale twin cuts. The aftermath blurred the lines between veneration and horror. Unlike other deities whose victims were quickly dispatched, Xipe's lingered, their wounds packed with Tzicli gum to slow bleeding while priests catalogued their visions. The Florentine Codex records that some captives reported seeing the goddess descend on wings of black fire, her antennae brushing their eyelids shut forever. Their bodies, when finally still, were wrapped in shrouds woven with actual butterfly cocoons, a grisly metaphor for the soul's transformation. Modern entomologists studying the ritual's symbolism note an eerie biological accuracy. The obsidian knife's grooves match the vein patterns of Rathskaldia or Azaba, a moth whose larvae were cultivated in temple gardens. During excavations at Totnango, archaeologists found ceramic urns filled with thousands of wing fragments likely released during ceremonies to simulate the goddess's descent. The deeper truth unsettles even seasoned scholars. For the Aztecs, Xipe wasn't just represented by butterflies. She was the metamorphosis itself, the moment when a living, screaming captive became an offering, then a memory, then a star. The doe figures sat innocently on the altar, plump little shapes molded from amaranth grain, their features carefully pinched to resemble Tlaloc's goggle-eyed visage. But these were no simple offerings. Kneaded into their earthy cores were droplets of sacrificial blood, drawn from the earlobes of priests and mixed with honey to create a sacred adhesive known as tes ole. When consumed during the winter solstice festival, these edible idols became something far more unsettling. the literal flesh of the gods pulsing with the same life force that sustained the cosmos. Spanish friars documenting this ritual in the Florentine Codex recoiled at the parallels to their own Eucharist. "They eat their false idols as we eat the body of Christ," wrote Bernardino de Sahagun, his quill shaking with outrage. What the missionaries failed to grasp was the Aztecs' sophisticated theology of transubstantiation. Where Catholics believed in a symbolic transformation, the Aztecs practiced what scholars now call embodied divinity. The blood wasn't a metaphor for Tlaloc's essence, it was his essence, harvested from the same priests who channeled his storms. Excavations near the Templo Mayor unearthed ceramic molds still flecked with hemoglobin, their intricate designs matching descriptions of Tzoli idols in the codices. The preparation process reveals how deeply this ritual blurred boundaries between nourishment and worship. Women ground amaranth on metates carved with Tlaloc's face, chanting hymns that trace the grain's journey from field to flesh. The dough was then mixed with blood drawn during auto-sacrifice ceremonies, a practice Sahagun condemned as demonic mimicry of communion wine. Modern biochemical analysis of residue in ritual bowls detected traces of teosantly, a sacred maize variety, mixed with type O blood, the most common among indigenous populations. The combination wasn't arbitrary. Amaranth represented terrestrial sustenance, while human blood mirrored the celestial water Tlaloc provided as rain. During the solstice ceremony, participants didn't just eat the idols, they negotiated with them. The Florentine Codex depicts nobles holding whispered conversations with their dough deities before consumption, striking bargains for rainfall and harvest. Some glyphs suggest the idols were broken along cardinal directions, with each fragment carrying specific blessings: the head for wisdom, the limbs for strength, the heart for fertility. Archaeologists recently discovered a child's burial containing miniature Tzoli figures with bite marks still visible, proof even the youngest were initiated into this edible theology. The aftermath of the ritual held its own mysteries. Unlike Christian communion wafers that vanished entirely, the Aztecs preserved fragments of consumed idols in straw boxes called petlacali. Excavated examples from Texcoco reveal these containers were lined with salt and rubber to prevent decay, suggesting the remaining pieces were considered potent talismans. One such box, now in the National Museum of Anthropology, still emits a faint metallic scent, centuries-old blood molecules clinging stubbornly to the fibers. What unsettled the Spanish most wasn't the blood itself, but the Aztecs' lack of apology for its necessity. Where Eucharist theology framed consumption as divine mercy, Tzoli rituals celebrated an unflinching truth: gods and humans sustained each other through reciprocal violence. A mural at Teotihuacan captures this duality: Tlaloc's tears falling as both rain and blood, nourishing amaranth fields that would later be milled into dough for new idols. The circle never ended, it merely changed forms from grain to flesh to spirit and back again. Modern scholars argue these rituals reveal a profound ecological awareness. By ingesting blood-infused dough during the solstice, the year's weakest sunlight participants symbolically replenished the sun's dwindling energy. The same amaranth used in Tzoli was also a survival crop during droughts, intertwining practical and sacred sustenance. When Spanish missionaries burned amaranth fields to suppress the ritual, they unknowingly attacked both a food source and a cosmic engine, one that had sustained Mesoamerican civilizations long before the Eucharist's wafers touched European tongues. Today, as Mexican bakers revive pre-Hispanic amaranth treats called alegrias, few realize they're handling the secular descendants of those bloody idols. The seeds still pop under teeth with the same sound described in the codices, a ghostly echo of the moment when swallowing godhood wasn't metaphor but meal. The drums throbbed like a fevered pulse as 4 men climbed the towering pole, their bodies painted in the vibrant stripes of sacred warriors. Below them, the plaza of Tenochtitlan swarmed with thousands, their upturned faces catching the gleam of the midday sun. This was Panquetzalistli, the raising of banners festival where the Aztecs didn't just celebrate Huitzilopochtli's birthday, they recreated the hummingbird god's mythic ascent from the underworld. The 1585 Relación de Michoacán captures the spectacle in startling detail. 52 voladores spinning from ropes, their feathered costumes fanning out like living sunrays, while priests below kindled fires with the heart-blood of captives. Every element, from the pole's height to the number of rotations, was a thread in the cosmic tapestry that bound Earth to sky. At first glance, the Volador's dance seems almost playful, men twirling gracefully as they descend on ropes. But 16th century illustrations reveal the ritual's darker geometry. The central pole wasn't just a prop, it was a symbolic axis mundi, its base carved with serpents representing Totec, the mountain where Huitzilopochtli slew his sister Coyolxauhqui. The 4 flyers represented the cardinal directions, while their 13 rotations, each 52 total, mirrored the sacred calendar cycle. Modern reconstructions using replica equipment show the terrifying precision required. Ropes made from agave fibers strong enough to hold a falling body, yet flexible enough to unwind at a rate that matched the sun's movement across the winter solstice sky. A miscalculation meant plummeting into the sacrificial fires below, a fate depicted in the Relación as both tragedy and honor. The sacrifices that followed were no less meticulously orchestrated. Unlike mass killings elsewhere, these were timed to the Volador's descent. As the first flyer touched ground, priests would raise an obsidian blade to a captive's chest, ensuring the heart was extracted at the exact moment the last rotation ended. The Relación describes how the still-twitching organs were then placed in golden bowls shaped like eagle claws, their steam rising to feed the descending sun. Archaeologists excavating the Templo Mayor's southeast corner found a cache of these bowls, their interiors etched with microscopic wear patterns from repeated heart placements, proof that the ritual wasn't poetic exaggeration, but a tightly choreographed machine of worship. What chills modern researchers most is how the festival weaponized joy as a spiritual tool. The Voladores weren't somber acolytes. Indigenous accounts describe them joking mid-air, tossing flowers to the crowd, even pretending to stumble. A macabre pantomime of Huitzilopochtli's playful defiance before beheading Coyolxauhqui. Murals at Melanalco show musicians drumming faster as the rotations increased, creating a sonic vortex that participants believed helped wind up the sun's energy for another year. Even the victims played their part willingly. The Relación notes that some captives laughed as they were led to the stone, their faces painted with the same blue stripes as the god they'd soon become. The festival's climax blurred the line between celebration and catastrophe. As the last Volador landed, attendants would set fire to the pole itself, its collapse symbolizing the sun's perilous daily plunge into darkness. The Relación's artist captured this moment with unnerving clarity, flames licking at feathered costumes, spectators shielding their eyes from the heat, while priests raised dripping hearts toward the now bloodied sky. Today's reenactment sanitized the horror, but the original Panquetzalistli was a visceral reminder. Even the brightest light casts the darkest shadow. When archaeologists carbon-dated wood fragments from one such burned pole, they made a haunting discovery. The tree had been alive when felled, its sap still fresh enough to sizzle. For the Aztecs, renewal wasn't gentle. It was the scream of a world constantly tearing itself apart to be reborn. The setting sun painted the pyramids of Teotihuacan in molten gold as a lone hummingbird darted between the ruins, its wings beating faster than the human eye could follow. To the Aztecs, this wasn't just a bird, it was the soul of a fallen warrior, transformed into a living spark of sunlight. Their belief wove together combat, sacrifice, and metamorphosis into a single extraordinary vision. That men who died on the altar didn't truly perish, but shed their mortal forms to join the sun's eternal army as Huitzilopochtli, the shimmering hummingbirds of the dawn. Recent infrared footage captured at Teotihuacan reveals why this connection felt so visceral. When viewed through thermal imaging, hummingbirds glow like embers against the stone, their supercharged metabolism radiating heat signatures nearly identical to the sacred braziers where hearts once burned. The Aztecs couldn't see infrared, but their observations were uncannily precise. The Florentine Codex describes the birds as flying flames, their rapid wing beats mirroring the flicker of fire, while their ability to hover motionless echoed the sun's apparent pause at zenith. Modern slow-motion studies confirm a chilling detail. Hummingbirds' wings move in a figure-8 pattern identical to the Olan glyph, the Aztec symbol for movement and sacrifice. The ritual transformation wasn't merely poetic. Warriors destined for this fate underwent elaborate preparations. Days before sacrifice, they drank infusions of tuberosa nectar, the very flowers hummingbirds pollinate, to spiritually attune their essence. Spanish chronicler Diego de Ron recorded captives wearing headdresses with actual hummingbird beaks that clacked rhythmically as they climbed the temple steps, mimicking the bird's distinctive chirp. Excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered skeletons with obsidian beads placed where the collarbones meet, an anatomical nod to the hollow bones that make hummingbirds weightless. What makes this belief uniquely haunting is its scientific echoes. Hummingbirds migrate annually along the same path as the sun's solstice movements, a phenomenon the Aztecs tracked via precise alignments at Teotihuacan. The pyramid of the sun's western staircase points directly at the spot where the sun sets during the hummingbird's spring migration, a celestial landmark encoded in the very stones. Thermal imaging shows thousands of the birds roosting along this axis at dusk, their collective body heat forming a visible infrared pathway that traces the sun's descent. The warrior's journey didn't end at death. The Aztecs believed it took 4 years for a soul to fully transform into a hummingbird, during which it followed the sun through the underworld's terrors. Murals at Teotihuacan depict this metamorphosis in stages, first as a skeletal figure, then a half-human hybrid, finally emerging as a fully realized bird bursting from a sacrificial blade. Modern ornithologists note an unsettling parallel. The average lifespan of a wild hummingbird is indeed 4 years, mirroring the Aztec timeline. Perhaps the most poignant evidence lies in the offerings themselves. Archaeologists have found ceremonial caches containing actual hummingbird remains wrapped in cotton shrouds alongside warrior figurines. DNA analysis revealed some birds had been fed maize liquor before death, a ritual last meal identical to that given to sacrificial victims. The message was clear. In the Aztec world, the line between human and avian, mortal and divine, was as thin as a hummingbird's wing beat and just as fleeting. Today, as tourists watch these iridescent birds dart through ancient ruins, they're witnessing more than nature. They're seeing the last flickering echoes of a belief system that saw warriors not as dead, but as transformed, their courage distilled into winged lightning, forever chasing the dawn. Beneath the shadow of the Templo Mayor, archaeologists in 2020 made a chilling discovery: a gold bar the size of a man's forearm, stamped with the glyph for sacred offering. Buried in the precise spot where Spanish accounts claim Moctezuma II performed his final rituals, this gleaming artifact wasn't just treasure, it was a desperate plea to the cosmos. Carbon dating placed its burial in 1520, mere months before Cortez's arrival. For the Aztecs, this wasn't merely political upheaval, it was the unfolding of their worst fear: the fifth sun's apocalyptic collapse, foretold in the sunstone's carvings of earthquakes and sky-rending calamity. The gold bar's context reveals the horrifying scale of Moctezuma's last-ditch efforts. Excavations around it uncovered a charred layer containing jade beads melted into glass, flint knives warped by heat, and the skeletal remains of over 80 children, all sacrificed in rapid succession. Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz described the scene as a mountain of smoke rising day and night, with priests chanting that the gods must remember their promise. The gold itself bore microscopic traces of human hemoglobin, suggesting it was rubbed with blood before burial. This was no ordinary tribute, it was the Aztec Empire trying to buy time. What makes this ritual uniquely harrowing is how it synthesized all 29 previous ceremonies into one catastrophic finale. The children's remains showed signs of Tlaloc's drowning rites, their teeth studded with jade like earlier rain sacrifices. Nearby, warrior skeletons lay arranged in the gladiatorial combat poses of Xochitl, their rib cages splayed open as if mid-heart extraction. Even the gold bar's placement mirrored the Quetzalcoatl vessels used to hold hearts, except now, the offering wasn't a single organ, but an empire's wealth distilled into a single, suffocating act of devotion. The deeper terror lies in the prophecy's scientific echoes. The sunstone's prediction of earthquakes wasn't just myth. Modern geologists note that 1519 saw unusual seismic activity along the Cocos Plate, with sediment cores from Lake Texcoco showing layers of disturbed silt. To the Aztecs, these tremors weren't natural phenomena but omens that the sun's path was faltering. The gold bar's burial aligns with the heliacal rising of Venus, the moment when Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, was prophesied to return. When Cortés appeared off the coast in 1519 with sails that shimmered like serpent scales, the Aztecs didn't see invaders. They saw deities enacting the apocalypse they'd spent centuries trying to prevent. Today, that gold bar sits in Mexico's National Museum, its surface scratched not just by ritual knives, but by the weight of a civilization's existential dread. Every sacrificial act we've explored, from the flayed skins of Xipe Totec to the arrow-pierced warriors, was a thread in a grand tapestry of cosmic maintenance. When those threads unspooled, the Aztecs didn't surrender to doom. They met it with a final, gilded roar into the void. Their rituals weren't mere brutality, they were the desperate poetry of a people who believed that keeping the stars aloft required paying the universe in blood, gold, and feathers. 500 years later, as we face our own climate crises and pandemics, their story whispers an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the end of the world isn't a single catastrophe, but the moment the rituals stop working. The rituals of the Aztecs weren't just ceremonies, they were desperate negotiations with a universe they believed hung by a thread. Every flayed skin, every beating heart offered to the sun, every child's tear shed for rain was a down payment on existence itself. This was a civilization that lived with cosmic anxiety etched into their temples, their calendars, even their poetry. They didn't sacrifice out of cruelty, but from a terrifying conviction that the world was a fragile contract between gods and mortals, and only blood could renew its terms. What unsettles us today isn't just the violence, it's the chilling logic behind it. The Aztecs didn't invent suffering, they ritualized it, believing their agony had meaning. When a priest donned a rotting skin or a warrior leapt into flames, they weren't just dying, they were holding the cosmos together. Their calendars predicted eclipses to the minute. Their astronomers tracked Venus with jaw-dropping precision, yet they still believed the sun might not rise without human intervention. That's the paradox, a people advanced enough to build Tenochtitlan's aqueducts, yet convinced divinity demanded a pound of flesh. Now we're left to wrestle with the morality of it all. Were these rituals barbaric, or were they the price of living in a world where the gods felt real enough to demand payment? The Aztecs would argue there's no difference between feeding the earth with blood and watering crops, both were acts of survival. But history is rarely that simple. In the comments, I'd love to hear where you draw the line. Can we judge the past by our standards, or were these rituals a product of their own terrifying, beautiful logic? And if you think the Aztecs pushed boundaries, wait until we dive into the bloodletting rites of the Maya, where kings pierced their own tongues with stingray spines, weaving visions into the fabric of reality. That's a story for another video, but for now, remember this: the Aztecs didn't fear death half as much as they feared a universe left unpaid. In their world, darkness wasn't the absence of light, it was the cost of forgetting what kept the stars alive.